Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome to the 88th episode of the AV Experience. We're excited that you're here. Hope you're having a fantastic Sunday. Got a special guest that'll be joining us probably about 10 minutes. He's dropping off his daughter, Erin, from Erin's Audio Corner. So we're going to talk about measurements tonight. And so if you got questions about measurements, definitely drop those in the chat. And we're just going to have some fun. But while we're waiting on Erin, we got some cool stuff to talk about. Ryan, I know you've been busy with your theater and got some updates, and so we'll be talking about that. Fellas, how was your weekend?
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Ryan.
So I was skiing in Tahoe. It was significantly warmer in the mountains of Nevada and California than it was here. Right. We were skiing on Friday and it was 45 degrees in the mountains while we're skiing at 10,000 feet. Yeah. And meanwhile here, I think it was 0.
Yeah, super freezing. It's kind of weird, you know.
It was really weird. Warm that you had people skiing in shorts and no shirts.
What?
Yeah, well, it was 45 degrees.
Yeah,
and then you come here and we walk out of the airport, and oh my gosh, what a stark difference! What a weird feeling that I went to the mountains to warm up. It was really bizarre, but we were there all week. We went skiing at Heavenly and then at Kirkwood. Heavenly was terrible because normally at Heavenly, like, it's a really wide resort. So you can ski back and forth taking different routes. Well, they have not had very much snow this year, so you couldn't traverse. And the part where we were staying, where my in-laws booked the condo, there was a lift open, but only one run was open. So you had to drive all the way to California, the California side, which was like a 30-minute drive, which isn't bad, and then go there. But then all the Californians are coming in from that side, and it was just super crowded because nobody was, like, most of the mountain was closed. And then it was super icy because it had been warming and then cooling, and they hadn't gotten very much snow, so the snow sucked. So we were there one day, and then we skied Kirkwood for 4 days. Kirkwood was awesome. And then we came home. So I got home yesterday at like 2:00, and got to check out the progress of the room, but we'll talk about that here in a few minutes after we hear what Jonathan's been up to.
I don't have anything that exciting. That's really cool. So if you go skiing on ice, you can't steer anymore, right?
You can steer. You just slide a lot.
It kind of,
especially on a snowboard. Snowboard's harder.
It helps if you have a much stiffer, like, snowboard or ski. If you have a flexible one, it ends up going like this a lot, and it's really difficult to turn. So it depends on how much you can bite. I like doing moguls and stuff on like the bowls and stuff, and it just sucks when it's icy because you can't turn, and then you end up like falling into the valleys, and you just, it's not fun.
So you like moguls, really?
Yeah, I love moguls. Well, I don't know, especially when there's some powder up there and stuff.
You ski or snowboard?
Ski.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can't do it on a snowboard.
I'm not a masochist.
I've never tried to do it on skis. But I remember one time I was on a snowboard, and we were in a new area, went down a trail, and I went, oh no, this ain't good.
Oh no.
It's awkward, man.
No, we love it. So we were at Kirkwood, and they have a bunch of like topside bowls, and it was just got to ski the wall, which is what that resort's known for. And it was just, their snow was awesome. I had no complaints about it at all. Man, then I got sick, so I have a sinus infection.
Yikes. Yeah, Bruce says if you pizza when you're supposed to French fry, you're gonna
have a bad time. Yeah.
I'm not sure what a French fry is, but I'm trying to get my wife not
French fries.
Okay.
And then pizza.
Okay.
French fry, pizza.
So my wife likes the pizza, and she's like an avid, I say avid, I mean, she knows how to ski. She's been skiing for many, many years, over almost 2 decades. And she just takes her little time coming down the mountain. She slows one on the mountain. Little kids fly by her. She don't care. Just chilling. If you lose her, you just look up and say, okay, where's the slowest one? Oh, there's Jessica. That's her, man. Yeah.
I got a funny skiing story, like probably lucky to be a live skiing story. I've only gone skiing once, and a buddy and I, we were late early 20s. We went out with a couple girls on a double date skiing. At any rate, we did the bunny hill for a few times. Hang of that was all fine and dandy, boring. And my buddy and I, being the young men that we were, decided we just do the Black Diamond course next. Like never had skied before, either one of us.
Oh,
we didn't make it very far down that hill before we were just tumbling end over end, and like then just had to walk the rest of the hill down with no ski. You know, like one of the skis shot down the hill, and both of us, like, that was not good. We didn't know what we were doing at all. So I'm sure there's probably idiots like that on every ski slope, but I was the one that day.
Yeah, those are everywhere. Those are everywhere. You had some cojones to do that.
I did. Young man, full of testosterone, trying to impress the ladies.
He just went full tilt.
You had some cojones to go skiing on a date when nobody had done it before. Usually that's a way to break a marriage if you're trying to teach each other how to ski. That's awful.
Oh boy.
I don't think I could find a photo of it, but many years ago, we're probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years, because we've been in this home for 17. So it's been 10 to 15 years ago. Jessica and I went skiing and snowboarding. It was the last day. She said, "Hey, I'm tired." About noon. And it was our last day. She said, "Hey, go out there. I know you've been wanting to hit the train park." And I'm not like a crazy, amazing snowboarder, but I just like to hit some, small jumps. And I had the GoPro. I think that was the first year I had a GoPro. Oh, maybe I had a new GoPro, something like that. And so I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be good." So I got up at the top. I sat down and put on my gloves, turned on the GoPro. I said, "Lord, please protect me so I don't do something stupid." And so I went down, hit the first jump, and, I just caught a little bit of air. And I'm like, "Oh, that felt so good. That was awesome." Did the next one, boom, a little bit bigger. I'm like, "Oh, this is good. I got this." I went down. It was kind of a short run. So I had 2 jumps, got on the lift, went all the way to the top, came down, and I think I hit, I don't know if it was the first or the second one, but I'm like, I sat down. I was getting ready. I said, "I'm either going big or I'm going home." And I was kind of joking, but dude, I sent it. I mean, like full send off that ramp completely. So the ramp is like this. There we go. I jumped the ramp and landed way down here.
Oh no.
Yeah. But when I landed, I mean, it knifed. So the
Yeah.
front of the board hit in the snow. And I just remember, and up in the air, all right, full confession, I said a bad word. I was like, "Oh crap."
Michael said a bad word.
Yeah, I did. I
Oh,
knew
no.
I was in some serious doo-doo, man. I'm like, "Oh, this is not gonna be good." And I landed and I hit butt because it spun me around when it knifed. I hit butt, then my back, and the last thing that hit was my head. And I don't remember anything after that for probably at least 15 minutes. I've got it all on video. It's even on my channel. If you search for Youth Man, snowboard fail, something like that, you'll find it's old video.
Because that's when you were using your channel to do a lot of other stuff too. Like,
yeah, it was just random. It was
kind of
vacations. It was everything. It was way before 2018 when I really decided to, let me just see what I can do if I can grow a channel in home theater. And it was crazy because I ended up going to the hospital. I literally cracked my helmet in half. I mean, it split. Yeah, it was a pretty big deal.
No.
It was wild, but I had a minor concussion, and it's sketchy, man. So yeah, Youth Man on snowboard. I love snowboarding. I absolutely love snowboarding. But yeah, it was crazy.
We're going together here at the end of February.
Yeah. Yeah. We're heading out to Utah.
Hopefully we both don't die. That would be bad for M-Wave.
I won't be doing anything stupid. I'll have some fun, but yeah, so now I don't even really, I'll go down the train park, but I don't really hit jumps. It's kind of like when the big dog bites you one day and you're like, kind of sketched out. What about dogs? I'm kind of sketched out about, and plus I'm getting older, man. I mean, Youth Man is kind of old man. And instead of I bounce, I've kind of crack. So don't want to be cracking nothing. So super cool.
What is going on with my camera?
A second video in there.
He's trying to show his theater.
No, there we go. No, I'm not. I was unchecking the green screen, and then it had a background, and it didn't like it very much.
I thought you were trying to bring up.
No, I can do that. But let's bring Erin in before I do that.
Yeah. Aaron, hello, what is up, brother?
Don't bring me in, man. I'm not ready for prime time yet.
There is no prime time.
What's happening, man?
What's up, guys? How y'all doing?
Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise, man. Been a while.
Yeah.
I was hoping I get to see y'all at Florida Audio, but I'm not gonna make it this year because Layla's got a dance competition that same weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably end up going. I think you remember Kanga? He's gone by different names. Kanga, Siphonics.
Siphonics.
So he's supposed to be there. And so I'll probably run up there, try to hook up with him.
Yeah.
I don't know who else is coming.
I'm sure Gene and the rest of the Audioholics, Don Dunn.
Yeah,
I'd love to see them too, but I can't make that one, man. It kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But
you'll be at Audio Vice though, right?
I'll try to be at Audio Vice, and I'm going to try to do Expona. But it's just, man, it's always up in the air. Every time I think that I'm going to be able to do something, something else kind of flips over and shifts things around. So but yeah,
you still got your family. You got your full-time job.
Yeah.
I know that's
pimping ain't easy, man. I'll tell you that.
That was the biggest thing that kept me from a lot of events when
pimping.
Before I went full time, because you got a family, you got your regular job, then you got to take vacation to do it. And
it
makes it really, really, really difficult to do. So
for sure, man, for sure. Yeah, I think I'm going to try to go Expona, and then I'm going to try to make Audio Vice. That's what I'm shooting for. But then there's the car audio side that I want to try to get back into as well.
Ooh,
I miss seeing all my buddies, and one of them has a meet in North Carolina every May, and I really want to go to that. So it's just trying to juggle all the different pieces and parts.
Sure.
Yeah. Trying to be efficient. Pizza equals pieces and parts.
All right. Sweet. Well, I think Ryan's going to show us some updates of his home theater. So he's building out a crazy full Ascendo. And Ryan, you can kind of elaborate on what you're going to have in that for those that are not aware or you don't know.
So let me take you over here. My basement is complete.
I'm gonna make you big here.
Disaster. Does it help if I do this? Is that better?
Yeah, that actually looks way better.
So it's a little dark because there's no lights in here yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very different than when you guys first saw it. So let me turn some lights on. So you guys probably saw it down to studs last time. But now we've got all the OSB up. So it's fully OSB'd in. There's 8,000 pounds of OSB in this room. There's 100 sheets of 80-pound OSB because they're all, you guys can see them here. They're all double stacked. So you've got OSB, green glue, OSB, 7/8 hat channel clip on the 2x4. The Rissa clips on hat channel with the OSB. Typically people do it with drywall, but I'm a masochist and I hate my contractor. Not really, he's been awesome. So we decided to do OSB because we needed a mounting structure to do all of this on. So this is what we ended up doing. So the speaker wire is already in the ceiling. We just have to cut into it to get it. So you can kind of see the marks. I don't know if you can see it. The pencil mark right there, marking where the speaker wire is in the ceiling. Because the ceiling's actually too short to mount the speakers directly to it, I think right now. I'll know more once I get the speakers to kind of put them in here and see how I like it. But as of right now, I think we're going to cut holes in it and put the speaker kind of in the ceiling to save some room. But I don't really know how I'm going to do it. They're going to be covered with clouds, like a fabric cloud. So you're not going to be able to see it, and the speaker is going to fire through it. So that's how that's all going to work. And then this is going to be where the 50-inch is going to sit. You guys have probably seen this already sorry for the mess, but when this was down to the studs, the 50 sits right here on the tile. Okay. And then 21, 12 inch, 12 inch. We decided to go from 15.
Go a little bit slower your camera.
Sorry?
I said, just go a little bit slower your camera. There's a kind of like a lag. It's pretty choppy.
Oh, so 50, 21, and then the two rears. But we decided to go with 12s instead of the 15s because the 15s would just be too big. They're like 3 feet long and a 1.5 feet wide and
I think 11 inches deep per speaker, and just mounting those on the ceiling would have problematic. So we decided to just go with the 12s. The 12s are like 2 dB short of what the 15s can do, so we weren't really losing very much. And then you've the HVAC, the projector right there, that pulls down and that'll go straight into the hush box for evacing all of the air. And then you've got HVAC register dumping air in back here that the projector will suck in. And then this will all be an acoustic wall, so you won't see any of that. And then you'll see the 50.
So is this your rear? This is
the rear wall. Right? Yeah. So you've got about 8 feet of stuff back here. And then
now, will
up
you have
here,
access back there?
all the panels come off.
Okay.
So I can get behind anything. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Cool. Perfect.
So then up here, screen wall, we duplicated as much as we could on both sides so that it's symmetrical. It's not perfect, but it'll do well enough. That's the exhaust for the projector coming down. All of the ducting and stuff is done in soft ducting, so we could limit rattles. So I didn't want any hard ducting above this room. And then that's another duct register for air coming into the room. Then there is a return vent over there, and there's a return vent over there. So the idea is pressure. We're going to be pulling air from back there through the room out up here. So there's no outside of the projector, there's no return back there, but I wanted to create a pressure and come this way. So then these are going to be like lift off panels, because I need a way to get back there. Originally, we were going to do like a screen that could come up like what Michael has, but I didn't want to induce another mechanism. So we decided to do this. So we have these panels, which are effectively just sandwiches of those, right, that you can put handles on, and then they'll go, we're going to put stripping all the way around.
We're losing you.
Built a Faraday cage into that room or something. It's got no signal.
Well, he's got so much thickness in that.
Not temporarily, but
in the boards, his Wi-Fi is not even coming in there.
Oh, and he cut out completely now.
That's funny. Well, let's see. Oh, that's his other chair. Oh, I mean,
he's back. Let's see if we can add him again.
Oh, look at those toes.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
I got green glue on my toes.
Oh, that's better than fungus.
So you guys, yeah, well, sometimes you get that too. So what did you guys hear last time?
It's cutting in and out, Ryan, to be quite honest, the whole time. Yeah. We can make out what you're saying, but your connection's bad.
Yeah, someone said you've got Ryan's house has less pixels than an NES.
That's messed up.
And now he's got the void. So this is what his theater room is going to look like when he turns off the lights. Yeah, it's just going to be black.
You know the sound deadening's in place when you're losing Wi-Fi signal.
Yeah.
Man, there just went again.
Yeah. Okay, we got you back. We see your toes.
He is wearing pants.
Yeah, I don't know. That part of the room just gets really bad.
Now go ahead and shut your phone.
That part of the room just gets really bad reception, or the basement.
Yeah.
So
cool, man. So
just have to. I just need to make picture updates so we don't have to deal with that. I guess that's not going to work.
So all in all, what are you putting in your room?
Well, what part did you guys lose? Could you hear me?
I mean, sometimes it would cut in and out. So you got how many?
No, I wasn't on cellular. That was on Wi-Fi. So it's going to have to have an access point in there. I mean, there's like, there's material in there. I mean, like I said, it's 8,000 pounds of OSB in that room.
That's awesome.
So it's all OSB'd in now. So the next direction is, the next thing we need to do is I need to do the flooring. And then I'm going to start running electrical and all the speaker wire and stuff. So that's all next steps. As far as equipment, unfortunately, I don't know how much we can talk about that yet.
Still, there's still
I mean,
some things.
you've got like speakers though. So you've got
Oh yeah,
9 bed
yeah.
layer
We can talk about
or
speakers
11.
and stuff. So Storm will be one of the processors. Can't talk about the other one yet. So the speakers are Ascendo. So it's going to be Black Swans up front, and then the 12 Beryllium Pro passives all the way around and on the ceiling. So it'll be 11.11.6.
11.11.
Yeah, so we added 2
11
more
being
subs.
subwoofers. So you added more subwoofers?
We added 2 more subs.
Oh my gosh. So we're talking a 50-inch subwoofer.
So there'll be
3 30s?
It's 8 21s, 2 32s, and a 50.
Oh my gosh. So whatever. Wow. Yeah, you've got to sign waivers. You got to do something for M-Wave.
We added 2 more to make something possible in that room.
Okay.
At the recommendation of a processor company.
Okay.
So,
have an idea where you're going, but
that's awesome. So that came up.
Wow.
What else is happening? So Seymour is going to be the screen. They think there's some cool stuff coming with them that I'm hoping we can make happen for this room.
Okay.
As of right now, I think.
By M-Wave?
I'm hoping.
Okay.
I'm hoping. If that doesn't happen because of timing, it'll probably be a Screen Excellence Neo. So we're just trying to figure out what we're going to do with. There's some cool stuff with fabrics and things, so can't talk about that yet because I don't think they've announced it.
Okay.
Somebody asked about amps and stuff. So that room, I'm running one. Oh gosh, I don't even know. I don't even remember now. An obscene number of 20 amp circuits. So I think it's 12 20 amp circuits or 15 20 amp circuits or something for that room. I've got all the stuff. So the reason I designed the room this way is because I can do everything after the fact, and because all the panels are removable,
right?
I have full access to all of this. I don't have to like worry about running things in the walls and then, do I rip up the drywall to do it again? I can just run all the electrical, staple it to the walls, and then if I want to add more, I just add more, and nobody can see it because it's going to be behind the officina stuff, and then all the officina panels come off, so I have full access to all of the substrate behind it, which is super nice. So all the subs, it's going to be a 20,000 watt amplifier for the 50 and
20,000
multiple 10,000 watt amplifiers for everything else. And then
Aaron, what are your thoughts, man?
20,000 watts? I don't know, dude. That's ridiculous.
That's for one subwoofer.
That's ridiculous.
I mean, it's seriously 50 inches.
What's the electrical grid look like? That's ridiculous.
I actually have a call with a power company, not like a supplier company, but like a UPS company and stuff tomorrow. To try and manage some things, because it's going to take a serious amount of power to run that room with everything.
What kind of breaker is required? I mean, seriously.
You mean
that's
like
not a 20 amp breaker, right? That's like
I'm running like 15 20 amp breakers.
Yeah, I was going to say that's like a 50 or a 60 amp breaker.
We're not running one. We're running like the.
I mean just the one subwoofer. What is that?
Big subwoofer. Can a 20 amp take it or handle it?
So.
If you're doing 240 volt,
no, it should be fine.
You won't have any problem with whatever you want with 240 volt.
It should be okay.
I mean, we're assuming it's actually pulling down 20,000 watts, right?
Well, you got to remember too that even when it's doing that, it's not really sustaining that. So
it's not zero.
That's not going to be a problem. Yeah, it's going to be like instantaneous and then gone. Yeah. And it's not going to heat up enough in order to cause any problem for the breaker. So it's something that I've been trying to build in, but I don't really anticipate it being a problem. I've already talked to Ascendo about it, and they don't have any issues with it.
Yeah. I'm not sure you're going to be able to pressurize that room because the roof's going to blow off and you're going to lose all that.
That's right. Yeah.
It's actually really weird to walk into that room when we had one layer of OSB up and then putting the other layer of OSB up, all of the rattle just went away. Like, I used to be kind of a non-believer in the green glue idea, but hitting like one wall of OSB, one like thickness of it, and then putting another one up, it is like hitting a thing of concrete after you put the second one up. I mean, it doesn't move. You can't hear anything. It's really weird, but I can't recommend it enough now. But maybe it's because it's OSB and it weighs, I mean, each 4x8 sandwich weighs 160 pounds. Wow. So maybe that's what it is, but it's, my contractor's done an awesome job. I mean, I don't think he knew what he was getting himself into with the channel and the OSB. He gives me devil looks about the OSB because he's a drywaller by trade. And the OSB is like 3 times the weight of drywall. Yeah. And you can't cut it with a utility knife. So it takes a lot longer, but he's been a champ doing it. And he's done an awesome job. So when it's done, I won't be able to recommend him enough. I mean, he's fantastic. So
that's awesome.
It's trying to think if there's anything else going on with this room. Can't really talk about projectors yet. That's all still in the works, but have a conversation because I'm going to ISE next week.
Barcelona?
So I get to, Barcelona. So I get to see Maurizio and Peter with Officina. Okay. So we're going to talk about the finalizations for the plan for the room. They can start assembly and get this whole thing off and rolling.
Nice, man.
Because they're manufacturing the door and really everything in the room. Outside of we still have to build like the projector platform for the projectors, and then we've got to do the screen wall, substrate, and I've got to build out where the racks are going to go. And then I still don't know about furniture. So I got a conversation with the furniture company tomorrow.
Not going to use your couch.
Got some good stuff.
No, the couch is too white, unfortunately.
I thought that was kind of the point that you were thinking that would be
I thought about it, but it's too white. Like I wanted it to be, if it was like gray, maybe, but it's too white. So we'll see. It's still possible depending on how things go with the furniture companies. But as of right now, it's something else. How big is the room? The room is raw, about 28 feet long and 16 feet wide. But the viewable space, when you're actually sitting in the room, all you're going to see is roughly 15 feet long and 14 feet wide, because the rest is going to be eaten up by baffle in the back and screen wall in the front. So you've got 8 feet of baffle in the back, and then the screen wall in the front 6 feet deep. So
how far are you going to be from your projector, or from the screen?
From the screen, probably about 10 feet.
Okay, and how big?
I think like a 170 diagonal.
What?
Yeah,
that's a change spec too.
Well, it was originally going to be like a 160 wide.
Yeah. Oh, wide. Okay.
Wide. So like a 170 diagonal. I mean, it's going to be like the whole wall is going to be.
Awesome.
Make sure you can, I guess, if you depend on your seating, that you don't get your feet in the picture as you recline.
Yeah, we're not going to have any reclining, I don't think. So we'll see. I think the projector is going to be mounted high enough that it shouldn't be an issue. It should be able to see over everything. I've got to work with Seymour to figure out how we're going to do it and what we're doing. We're just going to make the screen as big as we possibly can. And
you got seatbelts, airbags. What else are you putting in for safety measures? Somebody was asking about a defibrillator.
You have some sort of emergency clamp system. If your amps go rogue, you can just smack it and everything shuts down. Erin, listen to the sensitivity of these speakers. You may already be familiar with it, but what are your mains? Your Black Swans are like 118 or something?
The Black Swans are 117 dB, supposedly.
Someone asked what kind of amps you need. You need 10 watts, and you don't 20 dB over.
You can just line level right into it, man. Just come out of the DVD player or whatever.
Just straight voltage. Just no conversion.
Yeah, you don't need anything, man. You just need like a volume. You just need like a volume pot, like soldered directly into whatever the source is, so you can sit in the seat and just turn it down.
I mean, they're 4-inch beryllium drivers. So
who makes these?
Ascendo.
Jeez. All right, I'm gonna Google these.
Yeah, Ascendo. They're called Black Swan.
I heard them at Atlanta Home Theater.
Yeah, he fell in love.
Unfortunately, I heard them at Atlanta Home Theater, and I knew once I heard them that I was gonna be having some problems.
Those coax, the 12-inch coax you're putting everywhere else for the surrounds.
I think 100. So right around there, but I'm gonna run out of power. Well, will I? So the limiting factor here with the horn is the 15-inch driver that's on each Black Swan. Like the horn is going to outpace the 15-inch driver. So he doesn't sell them. I mean, he maybe he has, but he makes one that you've got the horn, and then you can pack multiple 15s because you actually need, I think, 4 15s to keep up with the horn. Otherwise, the 15 falls short and it runs into distortion way before the horn runs out of gas.
Yeah.
So he started stacking them, but I'm never going to get to that point. I mean, even with that 15, I'm at like 130, 140, somewhere in there, which is just, I think it's like 130, which is way past what I'm going to be utilizing. So
this thing's ridiculous, bro.
They're awesome. They are fantastic. I mean, I heard the Black Swans with the 50, and here I am, Black Swans with a 50. It's almost like Jeffrey from Ascendo knew what he was doing.
So somebody asked in the comments, what's your ceiling height? Because it looks like you've tampered your ceiling down with that OSB. What's your height now?
Just under 8 feet.
Where was the camera being held? Were you just holding it at eye height, or was it on like a GoPro head helmet thing?
It's just at eye height. It's just under 8 feet because I lost about 3 1/4 inches with the clip, the hat channel, and the OSB. That's my thickness for hanging off the studs. And then behind all of the studs on the ceiling, you've got R38 sitting on top of R13. And then in all the walls, you've got all R13. So I've insulated as much as I possibly can. But I don't know if you guys heard me talking about this, but that's the reason that we're probably going to recess the ceiling speakers. They're actually box speakers, but we're going to have to recess them because I don't have the ceiling height theoretically to have them in the room. So we'll have to see. Yeah, Rassic, 3 Black Swan for LCR. That's what's going on up there.
With the room that you're importing, how much ceiling height will that take up beyond the OSB?
Nothing. So the room is panels all the way around. I mean, it'll take up a little bit, but we're floating clouds over the speakers. So they're going to sit at speaker height and the speaker will sit right behind it. So there will be some acoustic treatments on the ceiling, rug on top of hardwood on the floor, and then all treatment just around the outsides, and then baffles in the front and the back. So shouldn't really lose too much more. I've just got to see how much I'm going to lose once I get the speakers and we start measuring and figuring out where they're going to go and how they're going to get mounted and stuff like that. But the room is essentially the size it's going to be height-wise. I'm going to lose roughly 20 inches of depth on the left and right for the officina stuff, because it's got to sit off of it, and then you have a gap behind it for the speakers. That's it.
Sounds good, man. Don,
so this question came up. And, go ahead. Sorry.
That's all right.
You got to go ahead. You got a super chat.
That's fine. So Don has a super chat. Appreciate it, brother. Interested in how you're going to make your removable panel for the door. Got 3 windows and a door cover. Looking for some ideas.
Removable panel for the door. Not sure what you mean.
I think it was when you were showing, I think to get behind your equipment, maybe.
Oh, so all I'm doing there, and I'm not worried about aesthetics for this. So I've kind of got a get out of jail card there. All we're doing is we're taking an OSB sandwich with the green glue, and we angled the portion that it's going to sit in, and then we put weather stripping all the way around it. So the OSB sandwich is just going to sit in it, and it'll sit on weather stripping and up against weather stripping so it won't rattle. And then we put handles on it so that I can pull it off. So if I ever want to hide things from my wife, I can put them back there because she won't be able to move it. No, I think the weight's going to hold it. I mean, that sandwich weighs over 100 pounds. It ain't going anywhere.
Okay.
I mean, and it's angled. So you'd have to.
Oh, I see.
I mean, the pressurization is hitting it this way. So it can't go anywhere. So that's how we did it. So we can get back behind it and then be able to do what we need to do.
Heck yeah, man.
If you will.
Jonathan, you had one as well.
No, I just thought this one was appropriate since Erin's on here. Before you get those things all up in the ceiling or, behind the stage, can you send them to Erin for a little bit of Clipple review?
So they've already been clippled. I just can't share the measurements.
Oh, really? Okay.
So one of the cool things about Ascendo is they send all of their stuff, or they're still working on it, sending all of their stuff to a third-party lab to get their stuff clippled and measured, and then they publish all the measurements.
Do you know who it is? I guess you probably can't say, but there's only a handful of them.
No, it's on their. Hold on.
Is it
on
Workwin?
No, it's in
Ascendo's overseas. So
yeah, it's in the EU. Hold on, I can tell you here in just a second because it's on the measurements itself. Hold on.
I was just curious who they might send it to. The only one I know of in the States is Workwin. There used to be another one called Red Rock Acoustics, but I don't think he does. I know he doesn't do anything anymore. He retired.
Their website's a little slow.
Yeah, I was just on there looking up something and gave up. And I've got a 2 gig connection.
I don't. It's not you. I think some of the images are just too big.
I've heard that before. It's not you. It's the website.
Let's see. Come on.
I did see the Black Swans are 144 pounds, and I was like,
yeah,
I ain't lifting those. I talked to a friend of mine who works for Danley Sound Labs a couple of days ago, and we were just chatting. And they've got a really cool, so they've got a Clipple near field scanner, and he's got a really cool setup where he has like a gantry, So it's that tripod looking thing, and then a flat bar, and then another tripod. So he picks stuff up. It's all electric, loads it up, moves the gantry over, lowers it back down, undoes the straps, and then moves it out of the way, and then measures it. And I was like, when I finally had the opportunity, this is going to be years from now, to build like a workshop, that's what I want to do. So I don't have to pick, because right now I'm picking up 50, 70-pound tower speakers and doing like this, and setting them on top of a 5-foot plate. It's different when you're scooting it across the floor, but when you're trying to set it on top of an 8x8 inch platform that's 5 feet off the ground, that's a little bit scary.
Let me see if they've put the stuff up for the Black Swans. I don't know if they're up here yet. No, but we can look at, what do I know is up here? So let's look at, is this one up here? No. Just trying to find one that's got the measurements because it's just a slow process to get these up here.
Well, he's pulling it up, Erin. With all the speakers you've measured, what's the most sensitive ballpark speaker you've ever measured for comparison?
So far, I would probably say something in like the lower 90s. I think, 90s. Okay. Yeah, I think there's been a couple DIY designs that are like that. Klipsch might be like the lower 90s. The JBL 4367 is probably one that would be a little bit higher. I'd have to Google that one, but I want to say that one was probably low to mid 90s as well. But most of the stuff I do is production, and if it's going to be high sensitivity, most likely if it's going to be really high sensitivity with reasonable extension, then it's going to be larger than I was able to measure at the time. Now I'm back to measuring tower speakers, but I'm still limited by the ceiling. So that's about 44 inches height that I can measure up to. Yeah, the 4367 is about 94 decibels at 2.83 volt 1 meter. So that's probably one of the higher ones. My old setup that I used to have for my theater or my home theater actually came from an old closed down car mic theater. And the compression drivers were 118, but the woofers were like 97. So there was a whole lot of padding going on there. I actually had to run those active.
So here's what they're doing. This is done by Controlo Audio.
Okay.
In the EU. But this is all public information on the website. So they are publishing all of their speaker measurements. So this is the report that Controlo provided. So here's the response.
That's one of their. That's the in-wall one they just showed.
So all of their speakers are in-wall, on-wall. Is how they're supposed to be done. So this is the proper way to mount this speaker.
Yeah,
and that's just why they've got it in this rig. Contour plot, vertical plot, CA 2034. So should be everything that you'd want to take a look at. I mean, they're not trying to hide behind anything.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
Which I really appreciate them as a company doing, because they just want to show what they're capable of and what they're making happen. So
interesting.
Scroll back up 2 pages for us, Ryan. There's your sensitivity, right? Max peak SPL. Does that have sensitivity there or just SPL?
Well, that's not sensitivity. Sensitivity, you'd have that in the CEA 2034.
So
go back up a little bit. Yeah, any of those.
I'm just trying to find the CEA 2034 because it was up here.
It was up there, right there. Yep.
Like mid 90s, I guess. Looking from here.
Okay. Yeah,
95 ish. It's pretty good.
So where are they getting the 118 from? They're patting the horn down.
No.
That's not the
This
Swan.
is not the Swan.
117. Okay.
That's the surrounds.
The Swan isn't published yet. So this one's published. So we're going through it.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see that.
Yeah. So enough about my room though.
Yeah, but honestly, that's a good segue to what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
Good job.
So we are talking about measurements, the importance of measurements. Of course, Erin is all about the measurements on his channel. What's that?
I said I am.
Yeah, he's like,
or he says he is.
He's one of the go-to guys. You are the only. You're probably the only content creator that has a Clipple, correct?
Amir does as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, does he have a YouTube channel though?
He does. He rarely posts on it, but he does.
Because most of his stuff's on the forum.
Yeah.
So we'll say you're the only active content creator with a Clipple.
I'll go with that.
There you go, man.
Yeah, I'll go with at least, until he decides he sees this video and then he gets upset at you for saying that. And then he makes a video just so he's active again.
Right.
Yeah.
But man, we appreciate what you do because you bring not only a subjective side, which I've seen you've been adding a lot more of that on your videos, but your primary goal is, hey, how does these things measure? Because if they measure great, then just historically, the vast majority of people will tend to lean towards that if they were to do a blind test. Is that correct?
Yeah. Generally speaking. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to have some fun with this. So if you got questions about measurements, drop those in the chat. And with that, Ryan, I think you came up with this topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Put me on the skewer.
You're putting me on the skewer. I just thought it was important.
Well, I agree with you.
Erin knows way more about this than I do.
Yeah. So the question that you had posed was, how do we read measurements? So is that still the question?
I think it's the thing that I want people to understand is, one, how do you read measurements? How are they applicable to your room? Like, why are certain measurements important? What is good? What is bad when you're looking at said measurement? And then at what point because, and Erin, you can argue with me if you want. I don't think measurements are necessarily everything.
They're not.
But I think they are a great place to find good gear. Right. I think there's going to be things that sound a little bit different. There's going to be things that behave a little bit different. But a lot of that can be seen in measurements. But I still think it's very important to go listen to things instead of just looking at a measurement, hitting buy and saying, I want that. Right. Because it may measure really good and you may not like it at all.
Yeah. I think, man, there's so many little intricacies and so many rabbit holes that you can go down when you talk about measurements. And for every argument, there can be a counter argument made, right? I mean, within reason. The thing that I tend to tell people to do is look at the measurements, use that to help you boil down to some that are reasonably linear. Or if for example, that you like a particular sound, which I think most people think that they might like something, but then ultimately find out maybe they don't. But let's pretend for a minute that you know that you like a boosted top end by 3 decibels. Okay, now go find speakers that do that, right? Or you know that you like a very wide radiating speaker and you don't want one that's narrow. Okay, now go find speakers that radiate horizontally more than 50 degrees. A narrow one might be 30 degrees.
But on that topic, how do you read that? Like, what are you looking at in a measurement to figure that out?
Okay, so that would, I'm happy to do that. We can get into that. I'll have to bring up charts though, and then your audience may just be like, you know what, we don't really care.
That's what we're here for. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Or maybe they won't. I don't know.
I care. So
yeah. Okay. I can do that. Let's do that. All right. Let me do a present mode. Share screen. Do I do entire screen? Nope. I'll do that one. That one. Okie dokie. All right. So this is Wharfdale Aura 2. It's a bookshelf speaker. It's a 3-way speaker. It's got a, 6.5 inch, maybe 3 or so inch or 4 inch mid range, and then an AMT tweeter.
You just measured this recently, didn't you?
I did. I just measured. That's why it was one of the first ones I picked, because it was the closest one on my site without me having to go through a lot of trouble. But what this has is information regarding the horizontal dispersion. And what you're looking for is, it basically goes negative 180 degrees to positive 180 degrees. So this makes a circle around the speaker, and you're basically collapsing all the sound radiation into a rectangular graphic. Frequency down here, and then SPL is right here. So this value on the right, I'm pointing it like I'm actually teaching the class now, is normalized. So normally you start off with your SPL. So let's say you have a speaker that's flat from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Okay. And then as you go further around the speaker, all the way to the side and then to the back, that SPL is going to drop off. And as it's dropping off, you have less output. So this way is a nice kind of formal way of presenting that information. And it's saying, as you go from the front of the speaker at 0 degrees to the back of the speaker at 180 degrees at the tips, there is less SPL behind the speaker. And so the best way to read directivity is to look at this -6. So it's this lighter shade of red, and that lighter shade of red would be right through here. And then on the other angle would be right through here. So it's basically saying that about plus or minus 60 degrees. So plus 60 degrees, minus 60 degrees down here is roughly the sound radiation of the speaker. Now, one could say, well, what about negative 12 dBs and all that stuff? But typically in the industry, we just say negative 6 dB for the service of conversation. Okay. So this speaker, I would look at this graphic and I would say, okay, well, this one radiates at about plus or minus 60 degrees. Give you another example. Let me get rid of that. And I'll find something that's maybe a little bit more the opposite of that.
See, I'm tracking with you, and I don't, there's a lot I don't know about measurements. And so I'm understanding that. So hopefully you guys in the chat.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is this stuff is, it can be easy to explain if you happen to say the right words. But if I happen to say the wrong words, and it's super confusing. And I don't I'm dead serious, man. I could explain it 15 different ways, and one way might catch. And how am I going to know which way that is? So I basically beat my data to death when I explain things over and over and over. Right. But I feel like that's important, because some people, like I say, they don't catch it one way, but another way they'll say, oh, I get it now. So I'll do this.
So I have a question.
And I appreciate you guys bearing with me here while I do this.
You're good, man. So once you show the 2 graphs, then I got a question for you.
Okay. All right.
Folks maybe wanting to know.
Can you give me the screen? Should be shared. Okay. So again, this is the Wharfdale. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is switch over to Clipple the 9s. And that one has a more narrow radiation pattern. Okay. So you can see that it's closer to about plus or minus 50 degrees up through the upper mid range. Right. And then at around 2 to 3 kilohertz, it starts to narrow up a little bit more and more. Eventually around 10 kilohertz, it's around plus or minus maybe 35 or so degrees. So and that just basically means that the radiation pattern, more of it is focused toward the front. There's less energy going off the side. It's about plus or minus, I would say, 40 degrees on average. Whereas this Wharfdale through the mid-range, so this is another caveat, through the mid-range is about plus or minus 60. But the Wharfdale, when you get to the 7 kilohertz area, so the upper treble, it starts to narrow up. And that creates some other potential issues depending on your likes, the frequency response of the speaker, and those things. But yeah, normally when you're trying to figure out how wide a radiation how wide the radiation of a speaker is, you would look at this lighter red color right here, this negative 6 dB, and you would say, all right, well, it's roughly between plus or minus 50 degrees or something like that.
Yeah. So what is ideal? Like what would
well,
a great speaker?
Yeah. So that could be an hour-long conversation, and I'm not kidding.
I mean, generally, is there a certain kind of pattern that you're wanting to look for?
Yeah.
Or?
So normally what you want is you want a pattern that is pretty even throughout all frequencies. And if you go and take, maybe I'll find another example here. I think I did one somewhat recently that wasn't quite that good.
And so all this can be found on Erin's website, aaronsaudiocorner.com. So definitely show him some love. All of these are free, but he's got a great Patreon and he gives extra access. So
I do. Thank you for mentioning my Patreon.
I'm gonna hook you up, man. We're grateful you're here.
Here's an example. This is the Acoustic Energy AE100 MK2. So it's a bookshelf speaker, like a 6-inch or so mid-woofer, maybe a 1-inch dome tweeter, give or take. And we can see that this one, see how this one's kind of bouncing around and doing some odd stuff?
Sure.
So what this is saying is that the sound that's radiated out into the room isn't uniform. It's depending on what frequency, it might be 50 degrees wide, and then at another frequency, it might be 30 degrees wide. And we can take an example. Literally, we can say at 1 kilohertz for this speaker, you're at about plus or minus 80 degrees. So this region right here, this region right here. And then at, what is this?
So we don't see your mouse moving now for some.
Oh, you don't? Okay. I'm sorry.
It's on and off. Now it's moving.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then at 1 kilohertz, about plus or minus 80 degrees. Do you see the mouse?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then at around, I think this is like 4 kilohertz, maybe. It's at about plus or minus 50 degrees. Okay. So what that means is that if you have a sound, and I use this example a lot. So if people here have seen my channel, they're probably like, oh my God, here we go again. But this is a good example. If you have a particular sound that is at 1 kilohertz, and it's supposed to be at the same point as maybe let's say the cymbals at 10 kilohertz in the sound stage. Well, the problem with a speaker that doesn't have uniform directivity is that the 1 kilohertz sound may be at one place, but the 10 kilohertz sound is going to be more narrow. So it's going to sound like it's in a different place. So that's one way to kind of look at how this information can be used. Okay. So ideally, you're going to have a speaker that has more uniform dispersion. This clip is narrowing throughout, but I would say that the dispersion pattern of this, as far as directivity goes, is better than this speaker because this speaker is bouncing all around.
It's more linear.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The Wharfdale Aura, however, I like the sound of this speaker more because it generally has a wider dispersion than this Klipsch by about 20 degrees or so. But the problem with this one is that it does narrow in the higher frequency. So the highest frequency sounds aren't going to quite track the same way that the mid-range frequencies do as far as like stage and location, things like that. So there's always a trade-off. And the thing about this Wharfdale is that there's a resonance around 13K or so, which kind of lifts the top end up. They left that in there because it gives it a more flat on-axis response. Because if they had taken that resonance out, and I'll just show you, be a little bit easier if I show you exactly what I mean here.
I remember you talking about this in your video.
Yeah. A lot of this is just me saying the same stuff over and over, and hopefully it helps. Yeah. So this is the Wharfdale. This is the black is the on-axis response. And you can see it's pretty linear. Like this is really good. But up here around 13 or 14, whatever frequency this is, there's a breakup mode. My guess, and I've learned that I was right by the designer verifying it, was that they left this breakup mode in order to give it a more neutral, let's go find it, in-room response. So this is the estimated in-room response. This is what this does is it takes all the data from the speaker all around it, vertically and horizontally, and it predicts what the speaker is going to sound like in your room in a typical room. If they had gotten rid of this right here, then this right here would have just dropped off. So you would have had a loss in the high frequency region. Okay. And that is because it narrows so drastically above 7K. I don't know how much sense that made, but basically what I'm saying is it took me 3 graphics to explain why you're going to hear what you're going to hear in a room. And that's the part where I think people lose maybe confidence in the data or just lose interest because it's not always a straightforward. I know that the go-to is to show the CEA 2034, and it's great. It's really good to have that, but you need other things. You know, I want to know what it's doing on axis. I want to know what the estimated in room is, and I want to know what the radiation is, because all of those things have factors that kind of align with what I'm looking for when I look at data.
So you're looking holistically. You're not looking.
I'm looking at everything, dude. Yeah, everything. And then it's SPL, and then it's also vertical. You know, do I have to sit in this very tight sweet spot, or do I have freedom to move up and down? You know,
like reclining in a chair, or
yeah, exactly. Or I often will say, if you have a home theater and you have multiple rows, this speaker will be a good one to show you. This is the vertical radiation, and this 0 degrees right here, that's the tweeter line. And as you go above 10 degrees, which is this little dude right here. So this window right here, very small little window. If you go above about 10 or 15 degrees, you start running into a lobing area where the sound above that tweeter line, above or below, is not going to sound similar to the sound directly at the tweeter line. So if you use these in a home theater, you better make sure that you compromise the main listening position, because the people sitting behind you are probably not going to hear anything similar to what you hear if you're sitting on axis with that tweeter line.
Is this the Wharfdale?
Sorry?
Is this the Wharfdale?
It is. It's still the same Wharfdale, yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is a characteristic, I think, of that uses an AMT, doesn't it?
It does. So the vertical radiation of an AMT is going to be more narrow than a typical dome tweeter.
And that's just a characteristic of that particular type of driver.
It is, yeah. And so you might still see something similar with a dome tweeter design. That's a three-way. So we could look at like the KEF. This is a coaxial. And if I go and look at this guy's, first of all, we'll look at its horizontal. So its horizontal is about plus or minus 50 degrees, because this lighter shade of red is just riding right through there. So it's pretty linear, as Ryan said. The directivity is very smooth. But if I look at its vertical, it's going to be a little bit different, because it's an MTM design. Even though it's a coaxial design, it is still an MTM. So there is a little bit of an effect going on around 2 kilohertz or so. But it's still about plus or minus 40 degrees, maybe 30 degrees in the upper frequencies, for having a dome tweeter, and it's a coaxial. So there's always trade-offs. Yeah, always trade-offs.
And these are things that I think people really need to consider when they're thinking about what type of speaker they want to put in their theater, because based on how you want your seating and speaker locations, it's going to dictate what type of speaker is going to work in that particular environment. Like, as an example, when we were still talking about moving and I was going to do this big theater, I was thinking about momentarily to do Wisdom. But the problem with Wisdom is if I did a multiple row theater, if you are above or below those panels, it's like 0 degrees off axis. So if you're above or below it, it's not good. So what you end up having to do is make the panel extraordinarily tall. And that just gets out of control expensive. So that was one reason why I decided, hey, I'm not going to go that way. I mean, it was one of many reasons, but that just goes on the point of, when you guys are designing a room, it is very important, if you're going to do multiple rows, single row, where your speakers are going to be, how high, how low, for you to choose and look a speaker by looking at what those directivity plots are going to be like. Because if you don't, you could get yourself into a world of trouble.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, vertically is definitely a challenge. I mean, I would say that generally, if it's a three-way design and doesn't use an AMT, then you're probably okay. But you can't even guarantee that in some cases. You really still need the data to understand how much variation can I tolerate for multiple row seating.
Well, and I think that a lot of people don't even think about the vertical dispersion.
No,
it's always horizontal. I mean, you never really hear people talk about vertical, but I think it's pretty important, especially when you're starting to talk about multiple rows, because if you don't, guy behind you is going to be having a totally different experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, some guys are asking questions about what we're talking about.
Okay.
So on those dispersion plots, Paige Troop asks, so would you have to actually sit closer to a speaker for a more consistent sound field?
Well, so Yes and no, right? Because there's some, it depends on how close you sit. You can technically sit too close to a speaker. Let's say you've like the Arendal speakers with their big waveguides. If you sit really, really close to that speaker, then you can actually be in the null where the speakers haven't basically converged together. I mean, that would be a pretty rare thing that you would ever be sitting that close, but I'm just giving you the extreme end of things.
I mean, how close are you talking?
Oh, honestly, man, I would probably say like half a meter or something, you know?
So would that be maybe considered like a near field setup?
Yeah,
like
that would be like a near field issue.
That's not out of the question for some people doing rear surrounds sometimes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, you think about like people with couches
right
against walls.
That's true.
I mean, if the speakers are right on top of them.
Right.
You could be causing more problems than you actually may be solving.
Yeah, no, that's true. You can actually be sitting physically in the null. You know,
is there a chart that'll show you that?
I don't have one. I had the means of making it, but the effort to me probably just isn't quite worth it, to be honest with you. Sure. Yeah. But that's actually a good topic that maybe I should pursue sometime. Yeah. I'll write that down. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sticky notes.
Yeah.
So when I have conversations like these, I just jot crap down. Yeah. And usually about 3 years later, I'll get around to it.
So another question about it, those plots is wider better?
Yeah, so I apologize because if anybody knows me, they know I've got ADHD. And when I answer one question, I'm answering like 15 other questions before I get back around to it.
I think that's important.
Yeah. So what was the question?
Is wider better?
Yeah, see, exactly.
Girl.
Personally, now I didn't know this until I started looking at data, but personally, I found that about plus or minus 60 degrees wide is what I prefer. And I really emphasize the word prefer. In a room, gosh, there's so many caveats to this. In a lively room or a small room, maybe where you're going to have the speakers right up next to the wall, a more narrow dispersion pattern might be preferred because then it's not so reflective. It's not maybe so, I don't want to use the word echoey because it's not really the word I'm trying to use here, but it's just
more maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's just almost too diffuse, I guess maybe would be the word I'm looking for there, if it's a wide radiation. In a larger room, a narrower radiation, this is my experience, tends to just have too small of a soundstage. It just kind of collapses in front of you, and it doesn't really seem to go out beyond the speakers themselves. And for reference, when I say wide versus narrow, I would say wide probably begins around 50 degrees and up. And then narrow will be like 50 degrees and lower. So the KEF coaxial designs, most of the time, I would consider those probably right on the bleeding edge of wide and narrow. Klipsch horns designs, usually I would consider them more narrow because they're closer to like 30 or 40. Most speakers that have a standard dome tweeter on a flat baffle are going to be probably wide. Most horn-loaded wave-guided speakers are probably going to be right in between like 40 to 60. And that's general take on what I've seen over the years.
Now, when you're talking about dispersion, you're talking about 40 and 30 degrees and so on. How is that represented in a speaker spec chart? Like typically, are they combining them or are they listing just one side of the axis?
So it would depend. When I say 30, 40, I'm talking plus minus. And if we go back to what I was showing a minute ago, this KEF R5 right here. Yeah. So this being the vertical, it doesn't matter. I would say that this one's about plus or minus 40 to 50 degrees, you know, just judging on this, where this red line is. That Klipsch that I showed earlier, I would say this one's about plus or minus 50 to 40 degrees because it's 50 right through here and then narrows up, maybe even down as much as about 35 degrees. So it's plus minus. It's reference to the zero. Manufacturers may say, they may take that 30 degrees plus 30 degrees and say 60 degrees wide. I think typically in the pro audio world, that's what they do. They say a 60 by 90 waveguide or something like that. So it's really plus or minus 30 and plus or minus 45.
Okay. Yeah, because Klipsch sometimes they'll do a 60 by 90 or even a 90 by 90 or 60 by 60, just depending on, you know, the size and the shape of that.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'd normally see when a manufacturer will spec it. But that's why I like having the data, because I can just go and say, oh, well, here it's here and here it's here. And the other thing too is that, you know, if we use this Wharfdale as an example again, that horizontal, wherever it was, you know, somebody could say, well, it's plus or minus 60 degrees or 70 degrees. And then it's like, well, it is until the high frequency. And then it's plus or minus 30 degrees or 40 degrees, you know, and it just depends on what frequency you're talking about. But yeah, to answer the question of which one is better, I think you need to understand what you like. And the only way to do that, unfortunately, is to have some experience and have a way to relate that back to data. You know, hopefully at this point, I'm almost 200 speakers in, I think. Hopefully at this point, I've tested something that you have listened to in your room, and then you can go back and use my data and say, well, I kind of liked how wide it was. The thing about wide versus narrow is there is a point where you can actually be too wide. So the widest you could possibly be would be omnidirectional 360 degrees, like those Apple smart, you know, little smart speakers and things like that. If you listen to those, if you've listened to an omnidirectional speaker, you probably got the sense of maybe the imaging wasn't quite as precise as other speakers. Maybe a horn speaker is more precise, and that has a lot to do with the reflection. You know, if there's a lot of reflections going on in the room, you can kind of picture it as like a signal noise. There's a whole lot of noise, and there's some signal coming through, and I've got to figure out where that saxophonist or that piano is, or that cymbal is, or that vocalist is in the soundstage. And with a wider radiating speaker, especially as you go smaller and smaller in room, it's going to be harder to tell how precise that imaging is. It's going to start to smear out a little bit in size. So there's always trade-offs, man, and it's just hard to say. Ryan, in y'all's test, you know, I was thinking about this when y'all did that blind testing, and I actually been meaning to talk to you about it, and I just now thought about this, but y'all tested it in a rather large room, and I was thinking probably what they're hearing is more of the on-axis sound in those speakers. So when I was looking at the results, I shouldn't have been looking at the estimated in-room response. I should have been looking at the on-axis and maybe that listening window response, but the estimated in-room response adds in all these reflections that probably weren't really occurring in that room because it was so large.
It was actually shown when the on-axis, because people, when they saw off-axis to the Martin Logan, stopped liking it. So that was really shown. The exact thing that what you're describing is people, as long as they were on axis, they liked it, and they realized that as they moved off axis through a speaker, the Martin Logan being the narrowest in this test, it became more undesirable. Right?
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Stuff like that's cool, man. I eat that stuff up.
Yeah. That was a cool observation.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's cool you got the data for it, and you can make those relationships. So.
Yeah.
Can I rewind the conversation a couple minutes when Erin, you mentioned the convergence has to be a certain distance before the speakers will play together nicely, and we were talking about the Arundel specifically. I think I can illustrate that because I did a near field video of the Arundel walking back with a mic, and you can kind of show that to the audience. So let me present.
What are the odds that I would pick Arundel, you know, like, and you happen to have a video? That's cool.
Share screen, this one, share. All right, tell me if you can see it.
Yep, you're good to go.
Yeah. So I don't know if this will come across clearly, but as I move the mic closer to the speaker, you're going to see a dip start to form in about 1500 hertz with a crossover between. See, I'm like inches away, and I got that big dip.
Yeah.
So even with the near field, though, as I start walking back to the seats, you'll see that flattens out. Yeah, it might be a meter, half a meter, like you said, Erin, somewhere in that range. But you'd have to be almost on top of it for that to be a problem. In regards to the convergence part. Right. The other thing I'd like to kind of get your opinion on, as you watch this thing, as I go back towards the seats, the room just dominates the response that you're getting on a speaker so much that I don't know that people generally realize that because they're not doing real-time measurements, how much it changes based on just moving the mic around. I mean, I'm not in frame here, but I'm moving that mic back to the main listening position through this course, and you're watching how much that frequency response is bouncing around.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, it's nice and flat when you're up close. Now look at the, you know, well, here, coming back up to it. So I don't think you can like lose your cookies on making sure that it's absolutely flat because it won't be in your room. That's the challenge that I always have with some of this stuff. So what's your take on that? I mean, as far as.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I would say you don't want flat in the room anyway. Because typically, I mean, most rooms, if you have a flat response in the room, it's just going to wind up sounding bright and certainly bass. There's going to be no bass if it's truly flat. So I think that people who don't understand that really need to get that their heads wrapped around that first, because there's a lot of, I don't know the word for this, but I see a lot of people like on AVS forum and things like that will say that, well, measurements don't matter because I measured the speaker flat in my room and it still sounded like junk. Yeah, because you measured in a room. There's a difference between anechoic measurements and in-room measurements. And in-room, typically what you want is like a slowly decreasing. I think it's like 0.7 dB per octave. So it winds up being in between 5 to 7 dB between, what is it, like 200 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and just kind of like a tapered down response. Of course, if you're going for a room correction and things like that, and you're trying to hit a target curve, I'm of the mindset that your target curve should be kind of whatever the speakers are doing natively. So if your speakers are falling off pretty quickly, I don't think that you should boost them. I think you should probably reorient your speakers or buy different speakers that have maybe a wider radiation pattern to pick that top end up natively. Otherwise, you're just going to be introducing a lot of extra power. But
you may kind of for your main listening position, but anything off axis could potentially be a disaster.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, for sure. So to answer your question more specifically, yeah, at some point you start getting where the room dominates, and I'm sure you probably know the term by now, Schroeder frequency.
Oh yeah.
And the easiest way to measure that for those who don't know, at least for the one seat position, is just to do a whole bunch of microphone measurements, like in a 1 foot by 1 foot cubic window. And what you'll look for is where the response is kind of the same, and then look for where it starts diverging pretty wildly. Most rooms for seat to seat variation is going to be like 400, 500, 600 hertz, somewhere around there, right? And again, it depends on the size of the room. But below that frequency, you can expect that that's where you're going to have to apply equalization, because the room is so dominant. You know, the size of the room, the length of the room, the width, the height, all those things play into that. So yeah, you're going to have to use equalization, but above that, you can actually use the data. And I've found, doing this many times, that the estimated in-room response, like I showed a minute ago, is pretty dang accurate to what I measure in room using a moving microphone method, within like 1 to 2 decibels, from about 600 hertz all the way up to about 10 kilohertz, where 10 kilohertz, usually there's more room attenuation and things like that. So it's not quite as reliable, but it's enough to give me a good idea. And I would even suggest, if you have the means, to take my estimated in-room response and copy it into REW, overlay it over the measured in-room response, see what you get. And then if you're trying to hit a target curve, just try to tweak the little peaks, you know, that are boosted up a little bit here or there, but try to make that target curve more along the lines of what that speaker is naturally doing. So I don't even know if that answered your question, but that's a lot of word salad I used.
I think there's some interesting things too that, and I'm not trying to throw sand in the air by any means. This is me thinking through this.
Yeah.
It showed on the on-axis response to that Wharfdale how it had that little peak at, what was it, 16,000 hertz or whatever it was at the higher end.
Yeah.
And that was to combat off-axis being too
super
low.
narrow.
Yeah, exactly. So first things first, I want to remind the audience, because some of the audience isn't as advanced as you are by any means, right? That when you're talking about these the charts that you're showing, it's, if you're on axis, it doesn't apply as much as if you're sitting in the left or the right seat, as we're talking about these, or the second row that's elevated above the thing, because the on axis is zero tempo. That's in the middle, like that 0 bar. If you're 30 degrees, 50 degrees, 60 degrees off axis, that's what we're talking about. So if you're in the left seat or the right seat, that type of thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is, you get a little bit of some mystery, and you might not be mystery to you, but it's mystery to me, in the sense that you elevated that tweeter at 16,000 hertz or whatever the designer did. At some distance, that starts to dissipate quicker than other frequencies, because the high frequency rolls off at distance faster than low frequency. I don't know at what distance that is. That's another little part of the equation that gets a little fuzzy to me. So like, is it at 12-foot distance? Does that matter in a typical room? Is it a 6-foot distance that matters? Is it a 30-foot distance? I don't know. So at what point, like, yeah, that doesn't probably look great to have that 16 hertz bump, but if you're at 12 foot, is it still there? And that's your in-room response that you're saying they calculate. Is there a standardized distance that's that in-room response is calculating to, kind of?
Yeah, so for that estimated in-room response, per the CTA 2034 spec, it's 2 meters.
Okay,
so, and I could actually calculate that out as far as I wanted with the Clipple software, because the Clipple measures it, and then you basically say, all right, I want you to tell me what's going on at 2 meters. Or I can say, I want you to tell me what's going on at 30 meters, because that's what some of the pro sound guys are using these for.
What do you think the average seating distance is for people in home theater?
I've done enough polls on this. I did one on AVS and I did one on my own YouTube page. And I want to say that if I had 9 feet would probably be a pretty reasonable average.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was actually surprising. I thought that if you
I would
really
have thought
wanted
it'd
to
be
go
further
and pull it up.
away.
I thought it'd be like 12, 10 or 12.
Yes. I want to think. I think I put in maybe it was 1 to 3 and 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 and then something like I kind of did them in steps and I just had people vote. And if I recall correctly, I think like the 9-foot area was probably the most common. It was kind of surprising. But yeah, so the air attenuation, I'll be honest with you, I'm aware of that being a factor. I've only ever considered that a thing for, pro audio where you're really, really far away. In my experience in a home, it's not an issue. I think the bigger thing is going to be just your standard room furnishings are going to capture some of that higher frequency energy. Even drywall, can capture some of the higher frequency energy too, at least to some degree, no pun intended. But then also I'll throw this in there since you mentioned it about the estimated interim response, kind of being dictated on or predicated on the 0 degrees. So I'll, if you don't mind throwing this back up. So what I do, and I've been doing it maybe for like a year and a half now, is I do estimated interim response in black, and that's 0 degrees. So that's if the speaker is pointed directly at you. But then I also do it 30 degrees if the speaker's pointed 30 degrees off axis from you. So good speakers, what it'll do is they'll track pretty well. A poorer speaker, generally what'll happen is you'll see a difference in the crossover region, and then you'll see it kind of combine in the lower upper frequency. Let's just say like 4 to 6 kilohertz. And then the top end will start to fall off again. And usually that's going to be because the crossover just isn't really that well built. So there's a directivity mismatch at the crossover. And with a speaker like that, typically it's going to sound kind of bright in room.
Is that what we're seeing in about 2000 hertz on that graph? That little bump there?
This right here?
Yes.
So that's probably already a resonance in the driver itself and not so much and that's not an issue between the on axis versus the off axis because the black and the red both track that. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not really a crossover issue. I can find you an example. Let me see here. Something maybe that's not too good in that regard. I hate to pick on it, but it's the Sonus Faber dude right here. Whee! Look at that on axis. Oh, that one's wrong. I had to update that. I forgot about that. Okay. Aperion audio. Let's see if I can use this one. Oh, that one actually looks pretty good too. Okay, I'm having trouble finding you a bad one, which is a good thing, right? Man, actually, all of these are tracking pretty well. Well,
read between the lines. We're looking at Aaron's least favorite speakers here as he's clicking.
Right.
Well, maybe they're not my least favorite. They're just ones that don't have as good off-axis performance as
Aaron's thinking is I thought this speaker sucked more than it actually did.
Here you go. Here you go. Yeah, right. That's what I was thinking.
The review on that one.
The Don Audio Emit 20. So the 0 degrees is black, 30 degrees is in red. And you can see that at some point, what you expect is the red is going to start to taper off, right? Just because it's turned away from you. But what happens is it tapers off between about maybe 1 kilohertz to 2 or 3 kilohertz, but then it comes back.
Right.
And then it tracks again, but then it falls back off. So this speaker right here, I can tell you based on experience and in-room measurements, that it does indeed sound a bit harsh in this like 4K area. And then the top end is, to me, is overly boosted. It sounds a bit unnatural. So that's where data can help you. And you can kind of get an idea of, what makes sense for me to aim the speaker one way versus another.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot, guys. I'm serious. I've been doing this, and I will tell you honestly, the more that I do this, the more I realize how little I know, but how exciting it is to be able to continue to learn these things.
It's a good place to be.
Yeah, it's cool, man. I enjoy it.
So when somebody is picking a speaker, right? We've been talking a lot about dispersion and things like that. What are the measurements they should be looking at?
The measurements that I look at are the CEA 2034 because I want to know what the on-axis response was, and I want to know what the directivity is. I want to know how well the off-axis tracks the on-axis. I want to look at, I'll just show you guys once I can pull an example up. I'm going to close out all this stuff because it's very boring to me at this point. Y'all want to find a good speaker? Let me see here. Let's look at the JBL 698 Tower. We'll do that one because that one would probably be pretty popular with some folks around here. Okay, JBL 698 Tower. So if I'm looking for a good speaker, the first thing I'm going to go to is...
Hang on a second. There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. I got ahead of myself. I'm going to scroll back up. 698 Tower. This is what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go to the CEA 2034 data, and I'm going to say, what's this black line look like? What's the on-axis response look like? This speaker, it's not great. Kind of bounces around a bit, but within reason, I'd say it's about plus or minus 2 decibels for the most part. Then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to look at this dash blue line. Now, ideally, you want this to be a line of some sort. It can either be increasing, which means that as with frequency goes higher, it just gets more and more narrow, or it can be flat, which means it's an omnidirectional speaker. This particular speaker, it's kind of flat-ish, but it has a kind of a dip through this 1 kilohertz area. But that's just due to the vertical offset from the mid-range to the tweeter. And I'm willing to ignore that because I know what that is. Then higher up here, it's flat. So the more linear this dash blue line is, the more equalizable it is. So say, for example, you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh, that peak is going to jump out at me. I'm not going to like this at 1.5 kilohertz. Well, according to this, it's reasonably flat in the directivity, which means the off-axis follows the on-axis response. So that means you could equalize this down some and make it sound better to your own ears. And then overall, just the speaker would take well to equalization. So I would say, all right, well, this is a reasonable one to start with because they're $800 a pop. It's got a good bit of output. So let's see what else is going on with the speaker. I'd go to the horizontal contour. Knowing what I know, I want about plus or minus 50, 60, 70, somewhere around that ballpark. This speaker is about plus or minus 50 to 60 degrees, depending on where I'm looking. Okay, passes that test. Now I want to know, what about vertically? Am I going to be having anybody sit behind me? If they're sitting behind me, then it might be a problem because at about 15 degrees above and 15 degrees below the tweeter, with the tweeter being this 0 degree line right here, there's a suck out in this mid-range area in the crossover region. So that's going to be problematic for second row seating. If it's just me and I'm on the prime row and I can put my ear at that horn, I'm good to go. No problems there. And the next thing would be impedance. I don't really pay attention to impedance. I mean, I'm going to buy something that can power it, so I don't really care. If I want to know sensitivity, I can get it from this graph. I can also get it from the CEA that we just looked at, but sensitivity average is 90 decibels. That's pretty good. And then we can see, like I said before, the response is mostly within plus or minus 2 decibels. There's this fall off and breakup issue. What is that, like 16 kilohertz? I'm probably not too concerned about that personally. If I'm shopping for a home theater speaker on a reasonable budget, I'm going to let that slide. And then, let's see, do I have anything else? Oh, I want to look at distortion. Multi-tone distortion, full range. If it's below negative 30 dB, this line right through here, then it's got plenty of output capability with low distortion. If it's above this, then it might be a problem.
Okay.
And then the other one I'm going to look at is compression to see how much dynamic range this speaker has. And what this is, just a quick kind of coverall, 0 dB would be the reference point at 76 decibels. And then what I do is I ramp up the output to 86 decibels, 96 decibels, and then 102 decibels. And I want this speaker to have a red, blue, and purple line to be completely flat because that means no matter the volume, the frequency response is still the exact same. So there is no loss in bass as I turn the volume up. There's no compression. We can say 86 and 96 decibels. You're pretty close. I mean, you're within a half a decibel. That's adequate. I'm fine with that. At 102 decibels for this one speaker anechoic at 1 meter, we lose some output capability below about maybe 60 hertz. And then even you can look at this and say, well, you're almost down at 1.5 decibels at 80 hertz. So I could say, well, I'm probably going to need a crossover to a subwoofer. Maybe 100 hertz would suffice, but certainly below 60 hertz or below 60 hertz, I need to cross over to the subwoofer. This stuff right here is going to have some dynamic range impact as well. This is probably due to the crossover region, but I don't know without being able to dive deeper into the speaker. But those are the main things that I'm looking for when I'm shopping for a speaker. You know, if I order one of these speakers and test it out, I want to know how linear it is. Can I equalize it? If it's not perfectly linear, that's okay. I can still equalize it. what's the radiation look like, and does it take the output that I'm going to need? And that's it. I mean, that's it. That's a lot, but that's it.
No speaker is going to be great in every one of those things that you looked at. So when somebody's buying a speaker, and if they're looking at your measurements or somebody else's measurements, do they have to kind of determine what's the most important to them? Like what's the most important aspect, whether it's linearity or whether it's on or off axis response or whether it's, you know, the directivity. There's a lot to take in on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's not easy, and I understand why people get discouraged, and that's why I try to walk through some of the stuff in my reviews and say, like, you know, these are the highlights, these are the things that I would consider more important, and when you're shopping, these are the things that you probably want to pay attention to. So I pulled up this JBL 4367 because to me, it's kind of a benchmark for a dynamic speaker that has really good linearity. And so I'll just walk through some of this. This really is one of my favorite speakers of all time, but it's like 16,000 MSRP a pair.
Oh,
yeah, it's not cheap. The on-axis response, look at that. I mean, it's within plus or minus 1 decibel. You do have a peak up here, but I'm okay with that. It's super narrow. I'm not going to worry too much about that. The ERDI, good EQ ability. These dips and peaks right through here are namely the crossover, and then there is a little bit of this guy right here, this lip on this cabinet kind of sticks out, and it really causes an issue right around this region. So overall, I'm okay with the directivity of the speaker. It's pretty equalizable. And then let's just skip to the dynamic range real fast, because that's the one that's like, what? This one to me is textbook. Like if you're trying to compare and figure out what dynamic range should look like, this is it, because you can see as I go from 76 to 86 to 96 to 102 decibels, this speaker has 76 to 102 is 26 dB. It has at least 26 decibels of dynamic range. I mean, there's hardly any change in the response as you increase the volume. That's phenomenal, right? So this is like a perfect home theater speaker. However, the drawback that this speaker does have, at least personally speaking, is the radiation is somewhat narrow. It's about plus or minus 50 through the mid range, and then it kind of gets up to plus or minus 60 in the upper area. Personally, I would prefer it to be plus or minus 60 throughout, but there's always going to be trade-offs. So that's kind of another example to look at. I could pick a bad one, but I don't think we want to do that. Oh, yeah. Oh, and this 4367, if you want to look at the vertical, if you're thinking multi-row seating, you might be all right. You know, plus or minus 20 degrees, I think, is probably reasonable with this speaker. But if the person sitting behind you is more than 20 degrees above that tweeter level, that might be a problem for them.
Now, on your compression testing, you'd recommend doing that at a level and making sure that the speaker is capable of doing that at the listening level that you're going to be utilizing. Like if you're listening at above 102, say you're doing reference with EQ, you still want to make sure that it's getting the same response as what you see here.
Yeah, that would be ideal. And it's worth pointing out that this was referenced at 1 meter anechoic. So typically what happens when you put a speaker into a room, you're going to get some boundary reinforcement, at least on the lower end for sure. The higher end going to depend on how narrow the directivity is. But you're also using 2 speakers. So you automatically gain 6 decibels because you double your power and you double your speaker, right? So you automatically gain 6 decibels. So this 102 at 1 meter becomes 108 at 1 meter in a room, plus some boundary reinforcement, which can be another 6 decibels or so, give or take. So, I mean, it's even higher, but that's why I just try to make everything reference the same thing. That way you compare apples to apples.
Yeah. So couple questions.
Okay.
Nicholas asked, and this was from way earlier, what are the benefits besides power efficiency that you get from a high sensitivity speaker? Is there a dynamic range benefits, lower distortion, etc.? Something hasn't been spoken about very much.
I actually plan to make a video about this. So higher sensitivity speakers typically, not always, but typically will have higher dynamic range and lower distortion, but within a certain window. And I think most everybody knows that in order to get sensitivity, you almost are always giving up on low frequency capability, right? So most 15-inch pro audio drivers that are in the upper 90 decibel region, their F3 is probably going to be like 70 hertz, you know? 60 hertz, 70 hertz is kind of typical for a 15 Pro audio driver. For a 6.5 inch standard sensitivity speaker with like 86 decibels, dude, you can have an FS of like 20 hertz to 30 hertz, right? So it can play lower, but once you get to a certain point, you're running out of excursion, your distortion shoots through the roof, you know? With the higher sensitivity speaker, you get typically higher dynamic range, but you are giving up low frequency capability.
Now, a question to go along with that, Ryan Kramer makes a point in how this was us talking about measurements earlier, how some measurements are a little misleading if you're not careful. Looking at you plus or 10 minus dB frequency response when you were just talking about the F3 with like their low frequency capabilities. So a lot of times speaker manufacturers, and I'm going to go into another question after we cover this one. Speaker manufacturers will put certain things up, but they either won't reference what the plus or minus is, or they will, and it's something insane, like plus or minus 10 dB. And you know it's not plus. You know it's going to be minus. They just say it that way so that, you know, you think possibly in the marketing terms that it's something more beneficial. So
I think most people don't really quite understand what plus or minus really means.
Right.
You know, because they don't have like, and this is the reason I brought up this graphic, because what I do here is I bound, I calculate mean SPL between 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz. So it's basically this window right through here. And I say, okay, it's 92.6 decibels on average. And then from 80 hertz to 16 kilohertz, because some stuff happens off axis, or not off axis, but on axis sometimes above 16K. And I don't want to penalize every speaker that has a breakup mode at 18 kilohertz. So I say 80 to 16K, and I give you a bound about what, 2.5. In this case, it's 4.5, and it's because of this stupid dude right here. If I cut it off at 10K, it'd be like, I don't know, probably what, 1.5 decibels pretty much throughout, except for this guy right there. And then I have F3, and the F3 is reference to the average sensitivity. F10 is reference to the average sensitivity. And you're right, a lot of manufacturers don't do that. They'll just give you some nebulous number, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, what is minus 10? Well, what does that reference to anyway? And then I see some people will reference their F3 to, let's say you use a really small enclosure and it causes the peak and the base to just shoot up. Well, then now their F3 is skewed as opposed to using the F3 versus a mid-range. So I almost would say that I don't necessarily care what a manufacturer does as long as they tell you what it is. But there are some manufacturers who definitely are not as transparent as they should be.
Well, and that brings up my next point of why do all manufacturers not supply this data?
I don't know, man. You know, you could go with the cynical side and just be like, well, because they don't want their customers to know. I've had some manufacturers say that their customers won't understand it. But we're getting there
cost as well.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, they should have their own. I tell you what, if a manufacturer says that they don't release measurements because they don't have any, I would run. I would not. You can guarantee even the ones that don't, like Klipsch never publishes data for their speakers, right? But you know that they've got measurements, and they've probably got way more measurements than I ever have taken over a speaker, you know? So I don't know why manufacturers don't necessarily release this. Now, smaller manufacturers, maybe they just don't have the means, and all they've got is maybe an Omni mic, and they're like, oh, I don't really feel comfortable releasing Omni mic measurements because I know maybe they're not quite as accurate as a full anechoic chamber set of measurements and whatever. I mean, Philharmonic Dennis, he measures and he releases data, and I've actually started doing some measurements for him, but he was doing that beforehand. Jeff, I think, releases data as well, right? And
there's not very many.
Not many? Okay. We'll have to try to change that then.
No, he's saying not very many manufacturers versus Jeff doesn't release many. Jeff sent almost all of his products over the database.
Jeff is very transparent.
Okay.
I'm just saying there's very few manufacturers that are open about this.
Yeah.
That will actually release it. And I think if you guys find a manufacturer that publicly publishes their data, that should be a vote of confidence, right? They're not hiding behind anything, especially if it's Clipple data, because Clipple is a variable that can be carried across multiple manufacturers for an easy comparison, right? Because you can take the room out of the equation, you can use it anechoically. it's a very good way to benchmark this speaker against this speaker measurement wise and objectively.
Well, there's a couple brands like Magico. They have their own Clipple NFS. They publish maybe like one set of measurements. They have a marketing video published or measuring their M9, their huge tower speaker, and they have like a 30-second video that shows the Clipple going around it, but they never release measurements for it.
Oh wow.
You know, Don Audio has their whole Jupiter system, but they don't release measurements. And I've talked to Don Audio about it. They choose not to release measurements. And I'm thinking, I understand if you want to measure stuff and not release the measurements. Like I'm not saying I quite understand it, but I'm okay with that. But when you go the extra step to say, look at the measurement system we have, and then you don't release the measurements, it's like, what are you doing? Like that actually, to me, that sends the wrong message. So
maybe not to everybody, because there's a big part of the space that says measurements don't matter.
Yeah. But slowly people are coming around. I think, you know, it's taken some time, but I think that once people start to understand the data a little, because I get these kind of comments a lot. Like, I've been watching your channel for a year. I didn't understand this until this video. And I'm like, all right, thanks for sticking with me.
That's right.
And we're going to keep learning together, you know, like, but it's the process. If I could teach a class on this, I would, and it would probably take all day. I've got separate videos talking about all this stuff. And even then I probably should go back and scrub those and redo them, because a lot of the things too is that these measurements are anechoic, and people will say, well, everything changes when you put it into a room. Well, not everything. Usually it's below like 500 hertz that changes, but there are certain things about, like, the data can help you understand how to position. Do you want to point it directly at you? Do you want to point it away from you? Some speakers are designed to be pointed away from you. Some speakers are designed to be put near a wall, like Kef. Their R3 Meta, R5 Meta, and some of their other Meta speakers are designed to be put a little bit closer to a wall because they have an extended bass shelf. If anybody's ever designed a subwoofer enclosure, you know that there's that Chevy Chev or whatever crap that thing is that basically kind of rolls off like a sealed enclosure, and then it has a little bit of a kick up, and it's a little bit of an extended bass shelf on the end. And those are designed to be put a little bit closer to a wall. If you put them all the way out into the room like a standard speaker, then there's going to be no bass, right? So you need to put them a little bit closer to the wall, but the data shows you that. And that's my shtick. I'm done.
No, I think it's good. So
I have a question in this lull.
Okay.
How do we account for, and this isn't a sarcastic question, it's a legit question. How do we account for the differences in the way like tweeters sound, compression drivers? They have a different sound that I don't know how to correlate to a graph yet in my own place of knowledge. Yeah. So, you know, if you take like a ribbon tweeter versus a horn, you could potentially have the same frequency response potentially, and I don't think it sounds the same.
No, they definitely don't.
So what am I missing there? How do I bring that to measurement?
So I would say the first stop would be the radiation pattern, right? So a horn is probably going to be more narrow than that ribbon. That ribbon is probably plus or minus 80 degrees, you know, all the way out to 10K at least. Some are like the RAL ribbon tweeters. They're super wide horizontally, right? But a dome tweeter in a waveguide or a compression driver in a waveguide is probably like 30 to maybe 50 degrees if you're lucky for unless it's a really shallow waveguide. But that ribbon tweeter is going to be super wide, and that horn is going to be relatively super narrow. So the information, no matter, and this is kind of a comment that I made in one of my recent videos, is I can take those two speakers that you just talked about, I could equalize them to have the exact same in-room response, and they're going to sound night and day different. No doubt about it. But that is due to the difference in the radiation.
Okay. So then if we took those same two speakers outside and listened to them in the field with no boundaries, and you made the frequency response the same, at that point, do they sound the same?
If you could float yourself off the ground, and they're, like you're saying, no boundaries, and you made the frequency response dead on the exact same in that seated position, they would sound the same. I really believe that. Now, if you want to talk about adding in dynamics and transients and things like that, then I think that's also measurable. I believe, that's my opinion, and of course I'm biased, right? That information is also captured in compression testing as well. I think the difference between dynamics and transients is just frequency. And this is actually something I plan to talk about in the video, is when I think of dynamic range, I think of mid-range, mid-bass, bass. And when I think of transients, I think of upper mid-range, high frequency. And transients and dynamic range to me are analogous. It's just, what frequency you're talking about. So if you lightly tap on a snare, there's not a whole lot of dynamic range there. But if you pound that snare, there's a lot of dynamic range. And if the speaker doesn't have the means to keep up with that 0 to 160 off the bat, then it's not going to have the same dynamic range as another speaker that is able to do that. And those things to me are audible. I don't know what the threshold is for audibility. And I think the easiest way that most people can probably understand this is if you have a pair of powered monitors around, most likely they have a limiter built in. So where the power is reduced for the lower frequency as you turn the volume up. So listen at a low volume and go find like a Jeezy track that has a solid 30 hertz for like a minute, just droning throughout it. I love Jeezy. Listen at like a normal volume and pay attention to that 30 hertz, right? And then turn the volume up. And now notice how low that 30 hertz is versus the vocal. The vocal is a lot louder than that 30 hertz. And that's basically what dynamic range means. It's either electronic limiting with like a DSP, or the mechanics of the speaker just can't take it, like the voice coil has gotten too hot, or you're exceeding excursion capability.
So
that's my opinion.
So to go along with this, Nicholas asks, what can't be measured? What do we hear from a speaker that cannot be measured? Soundstage, depth, separation, etc. A lot of the stuff that gets talked about with adjectives.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of we don't know what we don't know. I try to bound what I can, but I'm honest about when there's something that I heard that I'm just not really sure on. Depth to me, there's two primary things with depth. One is pull your speakers away from the wall further than 3 feet. The soundstage depth is going to go ridiculously because the further you pull it away from that wall, past 3 feet, it's got to be at least 3 feet out. I mean, at least I'm talking like 6 feet or more. And you guys know, you've been to these shows where you'll go to a room where they'll have the speakers right against the wall. And then you'll go to another room where they'll have the speakers literally like 6, 7, or 8 feet off the wall. Yeah. And if you're like me, the first thing you think is, man, that soundstage depth is ridiculous. But it's because of that late reflection off that wall behind it, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is depth can be kind of manipulated via EQ. Like in car audio, if we want to stimulate having more depth in the soundstage, we'll go to like 2.5K or 5K and drop it down about 2 dB. You don't do it so much that it's like, oh my God, it's completely noticeable, but it's enough where it's like, oh, that sounds somewhat faint or distant. Let me see here. What was the other one? Separation. So separation for me is a combination. It's like, I'm just going to say imaging placement, right? So if you have a saxophonist in the center, you have one off to the left center, and then maybe one off to the right center. How clear is it that they are where they are in the soundstage? Assuming that your recording does that well, okay, so you got to start from that. It's all baked into the recording. If you have speakers that are very well matched from the factory, they're within plus or minus 1 decibel, that imaging precision is going to be better than if you have a speaker that's way off, like plus or minus 3 dB throughout the frequency response. And you guys know this. I mean, the easiest test is to go into your Denon or Marantz or whatever and say, all right, I'm going to cut the trim on this left speaker by 3 additional decibel. What happens to your soundstage? It shifts over to the right, right? So frequency response matching is one, but then also the radiation pattern, the left-right horizontal radiation width. If it's super duper wide, that usually in typical rooms will sound more diffuse. If it's more narrow, it's going to sound more pinpoint. So there's different factors. And then there's probably other things that I haven't even thought of yet, but those are the two that I think of.
Okay, so to go along with this, what is timbre matching?
And
like,
it is
what
timbre.
Is timbre?
It is timbre, by the way. Somebody left me a comment. He's like, there's no A in timbre. And I was like, Google it, dude. You're going to be where I was 2 years ago. It's pronounced timbre. What is timbre in measurements? I think of it as just like the overall sound profile, the response on axis, off axis, and what that culminates to in the seated position. And why is it cited as important by matching speakers? Well, kind of the same example I gave. If you go through and you alter the response of one speaker, let's just say you just start throwing EQ at one speaker, 250 hertz plus 3 dB, 400 hertz minus 3 dB. You start doing crazy things.
It's going to sound weird when it's transition.
Yeah, they're not going to sound the same. Like that center vocalist that's supposed to be in mono, he's going to sound wonky as heck, dude. Like he may be dragging a little bit to one side, and it's just going to be like, I don't sound natural. The timbre matching thing that really gets me though is when we talk about center channels, especially like those horizontal MTMs. Y'all know I hate those things. No offense to everybody running them, but a lot of the time, like if you sit more than about 20 or 30 degrees off the center of them, which if you're the primary listener, you're not doing that. But if you have friends, then they probably are. And that sound is going to be different to some degree. Again, no pun intended. It was intended. I lied. Than it is if you're sitting right in front of the speaker. Now, horizontal MTMs, they have issues with cancellation. So as you go further off axis, the more that cancellation lobe appears. So you'll have like a suck out in the mid range or something like that in that crossover region. That's why usually 3 ways, like a coaxial or a tweeter mid, and then 2 woofers on the side is going to be better for a horizontal center channel, like sitting on your desktop or something like that, or your, whatever they call these things, wherever you put your TV, your stand mounts. So that's kind of where timbre matching comes into play. And I don't really know if, when it comes to center channels, horizontal, like MTMs, that I really think there's a lot in timbre matching. I think you probably just buy the best one you can and hope for the best.
Okay, so the next, let's stay on kind of timbre stuff. Well, sort of.
Okay.
What are the benefits and drawbacks of an open baffle speaker? And what would we expect to see in a measurement of one?
So an open baffle speaker, let's just assume that it's linear on axis. It's relatively flat. And I use that as my reference, but understand that most speakers, unless they're electronic, and been DSP, they're not going to be flat. They're going to be something that's going to be a little bit off. So if a speaker's within plus or minus 1.5 decibel, it's a good speaker off the gate. An open baffle speaker radiates. It's not completely omnidirectional. It's kind of like if you were looking at a top-down view of it, it's going to have a figure 8 design. So in front and behind the speaker, there's going to be a lot of energy, but out to the sides of that speaker, there's not going to be much energy at all. In my experience, this is just purely anecdotal. They tend to sound like they have a bigger sound stage overall, but they also tend to sound a little bit more diffuse than I generally care for compared to a typical monopole speaker.
So in taking this a step further, how does this correspond to an open baffle in wall against one with a cabinet?
An open baffle in wall? So the in wall speaker would be,
it wouldn't be open baffle.
Yeah, it's like it
well, I'm saying like because you have one, you would have it in the wall, so it wouldn't be open baffle. But then if you compared it against one that had its own cabinet, instead of using the wall as its cabinet,
yeah, that won't really matter. The only thing that's really going to affect is it depends.
Controlling
on airspace.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. As far as the overall response, like the things that the open baffle does, I wouldn't relate it to that example per se. So what'll happen is, depending on how much airspace there is, right, or if you've got more than enough, there's really going to be no difference. But if there's too little airspace, then what's going to happen is it's going to make a resonant peak in the mid bass area, frequency dependent, and it's going to sound pretty boomy and resonant. And unfortunately, like some of the in-wall speakers that I've tested that do come with backs are like that. They don't really seem like they're tuned well to the enclosure that comes with it. So Dan Romer at Per Listen, I talked to him about some of my results, and I know that they've done a really good job of making sure that their enclosures are designed correctly. And that the thing that confuses me the most is all of us got started in car audio. We got started in building our own subwoofer enclosures. We learned subwoofer enclosure design, at least with a cylinder or a standard ported enclosure. And we knew that if you put the subwoofer in too small of an enclosure, it was going to sound very peaky and boomy and resonant. And you're talking about companies that are charging $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for an in-wall speaker that is too peaky, boomy, and resonant because the enclosure is too small. And that blows my mind.
So continuing on in walls, what happens to soundstage when the speaker's in wall?
Yeah, so this is the one that keeps me up at night. What about depth for an in-wall speaker, right? Like, is there depth for an in-wall speaker? That's the thing that I still haven't wrapped my head around, because I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. But I want to preface it with, it's almost certainly cited bias that when I listen to KEF in-wall speakers with their coincident design, they sound like they have a deeper sound stage than non-coincident designed speakers that are in wall. But I mean, I would never bet anything. I wouldn't even bet this pin on that. I would keep the pin over that bet. So how's that? The truth is, I don't know. Like, I wonder about step response. You know, like we DSP and time align drivers and things when we build active speakers. And I can tell the difference if I'm listening to pink noise and I do the time alignment and kind of get that time delay like set locked in perfectly. But then that phase condition is also applied to the frequency response. So really what's happening is that as I'm moving that tweeter in time, I'm also altering the frequency response. I'm adding a peak dip somewhere in there. And then I'm kind of settling on the best overall sound. So in an ideal world, what one would do is they would have a couple different setups where each time alignment is also built with a crossover that's the possibly like the best possible that they can get that speaker. And then you compare 3 or 4 different ones and see, does time alignment really matter in this speaker or does it not? Now, if you move time alignment out like 15 feet, yeah, you're going to notice something, right? Like it's going to sound like an echo. But at what point does it start to cross that threshold of it doesn't really matter anymore? And I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Anything else you want to cover before I just start going through the rest of these questions? I think it's been a really informative discussion so far.
No, man. I appreciate y'all letting me just ramble. In my head, I'm like, don't talk too much. Don't talk too much.
No, that's the thing, man. We want to be quiet and let you share because you're just a wealth of knowledge. How long have you been measuring speakers?
Like speakers, I would say probably 3 to maybe 4 years now, like for the channel. But I started like in 2008 measuring speakers, drive units, electronics and stuff like that. So I've been doing it for a while.
So you've always had that passion. That's awesome.
Yeah, I remember trying to DIY my first speaker and that was a nightmare. Guys, I wish I could find pictures of it. I've told people about this. I was thinking, all right, so instead of having an MDF enclosure, you know, that's braced, you know, like I'm going to brace it, but I'm also going to use all thread. You guys know what all thread is, right?
Yeah.
So, and that was like 1/2 inch thick all thread. And I had the enclosure bolted on with huge nuts from the inside to keep it like from moving this way and moving this way. And I did all that. And honestly, I don't think it helped at all, but it was heavy as all get out, man. I remember like I lugged it upstairs. It was a tower speaker with a 10-inch scan speak driver and then a KEF coaxial that I'd bought repurposed. And I made it all active. It was active 3-way, had the speak on clips on the back, you know, it was dope, dude. And it sounded awesome. But I listened to it for maybe like 2 weeks and I was like, I can't do this. So I took it all back down and then bought the stuff that the theater was selling. There you go. Anyway.
Got a question here. Erin, would you say that the dispersion pattern of speakers would be an indicator of the angle of toe in and placement for the room treatments?
Would be an So what's up, first of all, Kanga? Would be an indicator of the angle of toe in. Oh, yeah. So if I understand your question correctly, then yes. So let's take a speaker that on axis is maybe plus 30 decibels or something, plus 3 dB at just high frequency. And the manufacturer said, yeah, we designed it that way. So when you point it away from you, it'll be more flat in the seated position. In that case, maybe wall treatment might help to absorb some of the higher frequency energy and bring some of that down as well. There's also the case where if you have a poorly designed crossover, and Kanga probably knows this, if you have a poorly designed crossover, then the off-axis energy as you get to the upper mid-range is going to be narrowing. But as you get to that tweeter, you want them to line up the same. But the problem was with the poor crossover is now when you hit that tweeter, it's become omnidirectional again. So you don't have like a smooth taper and dispersion. It kind of goes inward and then it balloons back out. And where it balloons back out, like typically would be like 2 to 4 kilohertz. Ideally, you would want to capture and absorb that off-axis energy, but you're not going to be able to do that just 2 to 4K. I mean, maybe there's methods of doing that, but I'm unaware. And the problem is that you can't equalize that because if you try to attenuate 2 to 4K off-axis energy, then what are you doing to the on-axis? Well, you're bringing that down as well. So no longer do you have a flat on-axis response with a ballooning off-axis response. Now you've got a dipped on-axis response, with a ballooning off-axis response. It's still the same. So they track the same way. I often will use the dispersion to kind of help me understand, does it make more sense to line up a speaker one way versus another? So one trick you can do with speakers that are pretty narrow in horizontal radiation, if you want to make them sound a little bit wider in the room, you just toe them out, like don't point them directly at you, just point them out more into the room. And then you just got to live with that trade-off of what's the response in the seated position, what's the stereo soundstage width sound like, and is it diffuse? Am I losing imaging by towing them out and getting more room involvement? So there's always these little trade-offs here.
So another question. Gary asks, how do I make sense of a waterfall graph? I've got my system dialed in. I believe it sounds great, but I still can't read a waterfall. You
and me both, buddy. Those things confuse the heck out of me. I guess it depends on what you're like. If you're talking like RT 60 times, so the waterfall graphs are just showing you how long it takes for a sound to decay. So I think ideal, and I'm not an expert at this, and one of you guys are probably better at this than I am. And I personally, if I had to know, I would call Matthew Pose or Anthony Gramani and ask them. But I typically see like a quarter to a half a millisecond is that right? Yeah. A quarter to a half a millisecond is a good T60 time for.
I think you mean a quarter to second.
Sorry?
Half a millisecond.
Second, yes. Yeah. 250 to 500 milliseconds. I was
going to say half a millisecond. Like, man.
Oh yeah, that's ridiculous. That's like that. No, I appreciate that. So yeah. What do we say? 250 to 500 milliseconds or a quarter to half a second T60 time is kind of a good range to be in for standard rooms, depending on music or movies. I mean, it's going to depend. So the only way you can do anything about resonances like that kind of like linger on a while, you can use EQ to tame them, but to actually capture the energy to get it to dissipate sooner, you're going to have to use some kind of bass trap like a Helmholtz resonator or, a broadband bass absorber or something like that.
So Ryan and I had an interesting experience with that with Dirac Art in my room and playing with that a little bit.
How's that working out for you?
We measured the waterfall with OmniMic afterwards, and sure enough, Dirac Art did good things. The waterfall looked smoother. It wasn't as peaky. It wasn't, it was just smoother as you'd expect it to be. However, there are 3 of us in the room, and 2 of us, Ryan and myself, preferred it without art on because, this has been bothering me ever since, because it's like, now I know I like inaccurate bass or something, right? Because with art off, your shirt vibrated, your pant legs fluttered a little bit, you felt it more, it was more tactile. And it wasn't like the frequency response was bad either way. We did a frequency response both ways, but art tamed some of that resonance, which in turn tamed some of the tactile feel in my room. So like Kraftwerk's, a bass hit that's really, really hits hard and like shakes your hair, no longer shook your hair. I thought that was very interesting. I'm not enough time in the seat with that yet, but it was like, now wait a minute, I can see this is better.
But couldn't that be caused by something else?
What else? I mean, I don't know. That's why I say not enough seat time, but that was very interesting to me.
I mean, I can give you an opinion as long as you understand that it's just an opinion. And
sure.
I mean, I'm not
what I'm used to potentially, like I've had it like this for years and now it's different, that's home field advantage type thing. Go ahead.
Maybe. So like in car audio, and I relate a lot of things in bass because car audio is a pain. Like if you can get good sound in a car, you're doing pretty dang good. In car audio, if there was ever tactile, you would hear it as well through buzzing and things like that. So, for example, if you've ever had a subwoofer in the back of your car and it sounded good and in phase, and you flip the polarity, and then all of a sudden all you hear is buzzes, and it sounds like the sub's coming from the back, and you got some weird crap going on. That out of phase condition is what's causing that tactile energy and that buzzing and things to vibrate. But once you get it back in phase, you don't have it. So, based on just what you're saying, and again, this is purely a guess, I would say that art is probably doing what it's supposed to do, and it's getting things better aligned in phase. But you just prefer that maybe, and we're talking about phase, it could be the difference between 0 and 15 degrees instead of 0 to 180.
Sure.
But you might just prefer, it sounds like, that tactile that comes at a loss of maybe purity or perfectly aligned phase and those kind of aspects.
Could you also say it in a way that if things are slightly out of phase, you're putting more energy into the room to get the same heard output. So then you're getting the shake, but you're not getting the hear.
The heard. Yeah.
Right. So you're getting more energy, air movement, and things in the room potential. And this is just
because sound's still going somewhere, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you raise the volume, would you get that same feeling? Like if you increased the output, would you get that shake back?
Yeah, I mean, that's all valid,
I don't know.
Time in seat testing.
We need to test.
If you cranked it up 10 dB more,
would you get the same thing?
Yeah. Are you back at the place where you like the tactile?
Or just boost 200 hertz.
But I think this is a good thing to bring up, is that all distortion isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just depends on what you like. There are certain types of distortion that we as people like. So you got to find what you prefer subjectively. Not everybody's going to like the same thing. Some people are going to like the really clean, no movement or anything. Some people want that, like Jonathan does. So I think it's really important that you don't just look at measurements, because I think that's a good example of potentially, and we'd have to do more looking into this, but potentially that measurements aren't everything.
So elaborating a little bit on this, because it's interesting, Aaron. One of the guys, I said Ryan and I preferred it with Direct Art off, but one of the guys that was here, we did it with 3 guys. His name is Bob. He has some, do you remember what kind of subs they are? Fancy subs with like multiple 8-inch drivers on them. Do you remember what they are? What brand they were? And he's one of these guys.
Starts with a P. My brain is not working.
That says basic, is it Paradigm or something? I don't know.
Paradigm.
Okay, he's one of these guys that talks about how 18-inch subs are real slow, and and that's his bent, right? I don't go there. That's what his bent is. So he was saying he was the opposite opinion of he thinks that there's too much bass in here all the time. So that's
why he thinks 18-inch subs are too slow. They're directly correlated.
So he was saying that with Direct Art, it reminded him of his 8-inch sub at home, where everything is just real clean and tight and fast, and
I love that word.
All those adjectives that we
now. That brings up another good point, Jonathan, that I think Art may have been cutting off all of your infrasonic.
I don't think so. We had a graph, and the frequency responses looked reasonably close. Give me a second. Let me see if I can pull it up. You guys can move on to the next topic. If I can get it pulled up, I'll bring it back. I can get my laptop.
Okay, so let's move on to another question until Jonathan comes back. Can you measure headroom in terms of bass? How do you know how much you have?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the dynamic range stuff that we talked about earlier. That's my answer for that. Dude, he's back fast.
Oh, it's gonna take me a bit. I'm just sitting there. I gotta look up.
How bad is our all channel stereo?
Man, listen, what's wrong with Pro Logic?
Nothing.
Michael, did you tell somebody to ask that question?
No, I did not.
You know that Chana and Joe still give me grief, like consistently.
On your AVR?
Even Tim in backstage, Tim will just randomly be like, "Hey, how's that Pro Logic 2 working out for you?" And I'm like, "You can go to hell."
Have you upgraded since then, or are you still rocking it?
No, not yet, because I'm in a rental house still. So I'm moving soon, and I'm going to use Chana. Gave me, he sold me for basically shipping his Anthem AV M70, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm planning on using that. Yeah. But somebody suggested that you guys just use butt kickers.
Yeah, I saw
that tactile.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with either of these. It's all subjective in what you like.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to answer that question. Yeah, I think when you're playing around with up mixing and stuff like that, you just go whichever one you think you like.
Yeah. Some people will love it. Some people will hate it.
So Onkyo does a neat thing with their all-channel stereo, or did historically. My 5508, for instance, it boosted the left and right channels by 3 dB each. So if you go to all-channel stereo, you still have like a left and right front soundstage presence, which is nice. Denon doesn't do that. It's all just kind of a mix of sound. And if you have dynamic EQ on, the soundstage moves behind you and all that nonsense. So not quite as well implemented. But Onkyo does it right.
Yeah. Hamu asks, Aaron, I know you're against on-wall speakers. As you said, mid-range is compromised. I'm using a Jammo D500 THX on-walls, and I love them. Isn't it possible to have a good on-wall engineered speaker?
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are possible.
Yeah. We actually just looked at one at the very beginning of this stream.
Yeah.
It's
So what I'm trying to say is you can design a speaker to be mounted onto the wall, but you would do it at a cost to overall sensitivity, because what happens when you put a speaker directly on the wall is that sound that goes out toward the front of the speaker also comes backwards, assuming that it's like a standard speaker where it radiates pretty much omnidirectionally to like 400 hertz. So that sound hits the wall and then it comes back delayed in time, and that creates a null and then a peak and then a null. And usually that first null is like around maybe 200 hertz to 300 hertz. I mean, it just kind of depends on the actual dimensions. So that's why I caution people against using on-wall speakers. I don't think they're the devil, and I'm sure at some point I'm going to wind up using some again. I mean, I had them on my last home theater, but there's just that information that's helpful to know. But yeah, dude, I mean, if you had a standard sensitivity speaker at like 86 dB, and then you said, I'm going to kind of try to work my way around that a little bit, you could figure out some way to compensate for that to some degree, but it's not going to be as good as a speaker that's brought all the way out into a room. And I think most people would understand that.
So what about like a THX recommending a baffle wall and so forth like that? What's your opinion on that?
That's completely fine. So then there's no rear wall delay. Yeah. So, and that's actually why in my last house, I built a baffle walls, because I didn't want to have to worry about, how the baffle walls are nice, because then you don't have to bring the speaker out 3 feet into the room and eat up floor space. But besides the fact that you can hide the speakers, you don't have to feel like you need to bring them out 3 feet in order to get the best sound out of them.
Yeah, I had Matthew Pose came over a couple of days ago, him and another gentleman, and I was asking about that on mine because mine's in a cabinet. Yeah. And my thought was eventually I'd like to do a baffle wall and fill that in with insulation. And so he was kind of explaining how sound radiates, like what you were talking about in your measurements, how it radiates around that speaker. Yeah. And so that can impact how it sounds and performs in the room. So if you put it in a baffle wall, you're removing that. And he also said by putting it in a baffle wall, I think he said you're gaining about 6 dB of output. Not that I need output. Yeah. But he said you'll gain about 6 dB more output because it's not having to wrap around the speaker. Everything's coming out into your room.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely benefits to doing that. I've always liked the idea of doing a curved baffle wall. Like I wanted to do that when I did mine, but I just thought it was like, that was going to be too much work for me to do.
Yeah, some people angle them like the outer speakers though.
Yeah, like wings or something, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I thought that would be kind of cool.
Yeah. Hey, let me hit these real quick, just super quick. Appreciate the $2 super chat, Hulk. Real quick, Arndal and SVS, will they be attending M-Wave? Arndal, I'm still asking. I just sent them an email, on Friday? So I'm waiting to hear back from them on that. SVS is pretty sure. So they're still working with Nebraska Furniture Mart. I didn't mean to hit that. Nebraska Furniture Mart. And so they're going to be getting back with us. But I talked to Nick directly, and he said when they were at CES and they unveiled their new speakers, and he said that they'd like to bring those to M-Wave. So, but we're still working on that. And then one last one real quick. He just says, appreciate you guys. Think you do a great job or make a good job. Appreciate the support, Thomas. Cool. So I'll let you guys hit back to those.
So we got that one. Jonathan, did you get those measurements?
I'm still working on them.
Okay.
Is there a replacement for displacement?
Yeah. Equalization and power.
Can you EQ and power an 8-inch woofer?
Never mind. I guess that's still getting you displacement. So what? Sorry, Michael.
So if you had a subwoofer that's 8 inches.
Yeah.
And so the logic there is people say, okay, there's no replacement for a displacement. So if you have an 8-inch subwoofer, even with power and EQ, can it perform the equivalent of an 18-inch driver?
I mean, realistically,
theoretically, no. But theoretically it could.
Yeah, but most likely not.
The likelihood, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the real thing is the FS is kind of really going to like define what's going to go on. So there is a Linkwitz transform speaker, right? And what that, and you can go read Siegfried Linkwitz. Jeez, that was tough. His website, he talks about this, and there's calculations that you can use, but basically it says that you put a speaker in a really small enclosure. The speaker's got to have a lot of excursion, and you've got to have a lot of clean power. And then basically you just EQ that sucker up. But the problem is that like most drivers can't really take that. You know, like in a real world, you're not going to be able to do that to get to the same level that an 18-inch is going to do. And an 8's probably going to have an FS of like, let's say 30 hertz, and 18 is going to be probably 20. You know, so those things play.
It's theoretical. Like theoretically, it could be done, but you start running into physical problems where you can't deal with enough power. The speaker doesn't have enough excursion to overcome the limitation of displacement. Right? There's again, it's theoretically possible, but physically more than likely not possible. So that's the compromise.
So you've got Peter Otremba in here saying squeezing a sub into a very small box will raise the QTS to 1.5, for example, and it makes a resonance. So he's right. He said that you can't EQ out. So that's not completely right. And that's where I was saying that link-width transform comes into. Now, like for most people, that's exactly right. But the link-width transform, the idea that that's predicated on is that you are indeed EQing out that resonance, but you're doing that by EQing up the part that's below the resonance. You know, but in order to do that, you've still got to have a bunch of excursion and a bunch of power, right? It's just no realistic way. I think that's going to work for most people. I've tried it with a 10-inch before in a small enclosure because I needed a really compact subwoofer.
Right.
And I just didn't like it, man. And I was always worried that I was going to wind up playing the wrong song. It was just going to kill that thing. So you're always on pins and needles every time you listen to it.
Let's get rid of that one. Grave Danger. Do you guys know what size rooms are the best sounding theaters? Is there any data on it? The bigger the room, theoretically.
The better the theater. Yeah,
that's because you have less room interaction.
Less room interaction, more consistency seat to seat. Right. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think, because your SPL fall off is going to increase because it's a doubling of distance. So the further you can get away from the speaker, the more equalized it's going to be over that distance. So the larger the space, the better. And it's going to also give you more separation between different channels. So if you had a large enough space, you could take advantage of front heights, rear heights, and you start working in the vertical instead of just in the horizontal. I mean, I know we're in the vertical with tops and stuff, but like when I did front and rear heights in my last theater, because I couldn't tell because there really wasn't enough vertical separation between the channels. But if you have a large enough room, it absolutely can make sense.
So Erin, I know you said earlier, like, man, I'm not sure diving this deep is your audience is going to like this. We've maintained pretty close to 175. Right now we're at 187.
It's going up after the
continuous. So they're tracking with you, man. And even in the comments are like, dude, this has been great, man.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm glad.
Nicholas asked, does soundstage depth matter in home theater with surround sound, or could it make it even better? I'd say it does. There's still imaging in home theater.
Yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't want that. Yeah.
Object placement. I mean, it definitely can matter. It may not be as noticeable. Like I've talked with Jonathan about this a little bit too in the past. There's a lot of times so much going on in home theater mixes that it's really hard for you to focus on any one thing. But if you were to set up and go into something and be like, I'm going to listen to this, or you're going to turn off some of the channels and give yourself an easier time in being able to isolate certain things, it can absolutely make a difference. The problem, I think, is we're horrible multitaskers. So for us to be able to actually focus on all of this and figure out what's going on, it can become overwhelming. So like we've done some testing at Jonathan's when we were comparing Storm and Chernoff, it was a lot easier to draw correlations between what the EQ was doing for the room EQ processing in 2-channel than it was in home theater mixes because there was less going on. So it was less overwhelming, right? So you could focus on what was happening in front of you. Whereas when you got into home theater, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to draw the correlation between what's actually happening and come up with any type of differences.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, Spiffy, we have had Jeremy on the podcast. Jeremy's a great dude. Hadn't had him on in a while.
Yeah, Jeremy's a good dude, man. I like him.
Got rid of that one.
Erin for the win.
For the win. Thanks, sir. I appreciate that. Mid-bass maestro.
Herc Drivers asks, does group delay of a speaker at various frequencies affect someone's perception of a fast or slow sub?
I don't know that. I really don't know the true answer to that. I'm not sure that there is a definite answer to that. I think fast or slow has more to do with kind of what you guys were talking about earlier about the roll off of the subwoofer, right? And really more than anything, it's just the boominess of the room, the EQ that's needed, the attenuation that's needed, the room treatment that's needed, those things, you know?
So this was I noticed this a little bit actually at M-Wave, and I don't know how many other people noticed this. The RS1 that was in the subwoofer comparison, somebody brought up to me that it sounded like it was distorting, right? But I showed them that it wasn't actually distorting. What it was doing is it was playing frequencies that none of the other subs could play. So it was getting lower, but because people were comparing it to all the other subs that weren't doing that, it was perceived like it was distorting because it was getting lower into the frequency response, into the frequency range, right?
Yeah.
So this is, I think, a misconception that a lot of audiophiles get themselves into is they say, I like clean and fast bass. But what they actually like is a subwoofer that can't get down very low, and they construe that with clean and fast bass. So what ends up being equated is falsely is a slow subwoofer is something that's not very capable, but to audiophile, or what is actually happening is the slow subwoofer is just being perceived that way because it's playing lower frequencies. At least that's what I've
kind of found that to be the case. And for me, like the additional step to that is that the ones that play lower are also lighting up more resonances in the room, right? So it sounds more distorted or more bloated or more tubby or whatever, you know. But if you slap a 50 hertz high pass filter on it, all of a sudden now it's tight and fast and all those things.
Yep. Exactly.
So,
and here's something else to consider is that, and this is one of the reasons why I really like the 50, is somebody's going to look at the 50-inch subwoofer and be like, well, that thing's going to be way too slow. Well, one of the coolest things about the 50 is because it has such a large amount of displacement, it doesn't have to move, right? So it's actually very, very fast because you can look at it and you're like, that subwoofer's not even moving.
Yeah, right.
You put your ear up to it, the thing's not even moving, but it's putting out an immense amount of energy. So people need to be very careful about equating size of a driver to speed of a driver, because actually the increase in size of a driver, if it's properly made, can actually make it less distortive, which is something that gets overlooked a lot of times.
I mean, ultimately, when people are saying, and that's a faster subwoofer, if it's faster, it's changing the frequency higher. So that's
what I always say. I'm like, that's a different frequency now. Right. It's not 40 hertz anymore. Now it's 43 hertz. You know, like it's not supposed to do that.
All right. So I got those charts ready here. I'm going to share my screen.
Do it.
Entire screen. And you're going to see the infinity window for a second. Okay. Tell me when you can see it.
Yeah,
we got
it. So we took a couple different measurements. This was basically like I don't know what the volume even was, but it was at a lower volume, and then we turned them both up and took it again. So this is no Dirac, and this is the waterfall plot with just like no EQ, basically. And then this is the waterfall plot with Dirac. So it actually has a little bit more, a little bit more here at like 30, 40 hertz. No, not even that high. This is 20, this is 50. So it'd be more like 30.
That's like 25 or something, maybe.
Yeah. And then like really nice and smooth as you plot down, where it's not, it's a little bit more wicked over here with no Dirac. All right. So now if we just turned it up and did the same sweep or same
you're increasing volume now. That's all you're doing. Okay.
Yeah. And this doesn't really give me a reference of how loud we went. But at any rate, this is no Dirac. Nope, I got them reversed. Let me switch these because I don't want to confuse the issue here. Let's go this way and then this way. So this is no Dirac louder, and this is Dirac louder.
What's going on with it?
That's
times on art.
I don't know.
Low frequencies.
The low frequencies are very different, but this is smoother between like say 30 hertz and 100 hertz than no Dirac is.
So what I would like to do, and this is going to require more testing, and this is something that I think I'm going to work with Storm on in my room, is I would like to put a curtain on where Dirac is stopping, like so that it stops dealing with bass frequencies at like 40 or 50 hertz. See if that gets you the tight, nice bass with an awesome decay time, but also gives you, Jonathan, everything that you're wanting with the energy in the room that's giving you the flap and everything from the lower frequencies. I really feel like Art's doing, or any room EQ is doing something weird with infrasonic because it doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is curious because you would not expect to see this much more here.
No. I mean, you're going from...
And if we saw this much more, you would think we would, think that Kraftwerk kick drum that we're talking about. Remember, like that's so low and it shook your pant legs and your shirt and your hair and everything. And when Art was on, it didn't do that. I don't know what frequency. We needed an RTA to figure out what frequency that was for that kick drum.
I kind of wonder.
It's not even a kick drum. I'm saying the wrong thing. Kick drum would be higher. It's like a bass synth note.
I wonder if it's actually the opposite of what I said earlier. If it's Art that's bringing in the distortion, right? And it's canceling out those wavelengths and you're losing all of this because it's nullifying everything in those infrasonic regions.
Well, so then you take Bob's perspective and he was saying like it sounds so much cleaner and tighter with the Dirac Art, which was interesting because, I don't know if we felt that way.
Well, it might in the higher frequencies. I'm talking specifically in the lower frequencies. So he says it sounds cleaner and tighter, but I would say that the reason that's possible or that's maybe happening is because Dirac in its room EQ, and this isn't limited to Dirac. I've had the same thing happen in virtually everything. It's actually nullifying all of your infrasonics. So they're going away, which comes back to exactly what I was talking about earlier with people thinking that infrasonic or lower frequencies are equated to slow bass. But in this case, it sounds tighter because if they're canceling each other out, maybe from out of phase or something, that they're just not there. So then audiophile would say, hey, it's tighter because there's no low frequency. But something weird's going on. That's 150 millisecond difference.
So this is the next thing that we got to kind of talk about, because this was the frequency response captures for Dirac on and off. And I just linked right colors. So left no Dirac, right no Dirac is blue. And then when you turn on Dirac, left Dirac and right Dirac, and this includes the subs, of course, that's black. So to your point earlier, no Dirac had more bass by a significant portion. Yeah. That's almost 10. It's not quite 10 dB, but that's a lot. It's at least 5 dB here. It's here. Let's do this. It's 84 dB versus 77 dB. So it's 6 dB or something, which is significant, right? If that bass synth is in this area, then that's part of it.
Yeah.
Up here didn't do much, but
I'm just hypothesizing, so I'd have to experiment with this.
Take this all the way down to, this goes to 5, I think it is. Yeah, 5 hertz. So yeah, I mean, Dirac was cutting out some of those lower frequencies all the way down.
I mean, even some of the higher ones, like 50 hertz on down. Almost.
Well, the blue lines are no Dirac. So Dirac was probably doing some things good in here to bring that up a little bit.
Like at about probably 60 hertz and below, you lost a lot of output.
Yeah. And then again, this is no EQ blue versus Dirac's Art, their Dirac's Art functionality. Anyway, one room, one set of equipment. We only had 4 of the 18s. We piled them up and 2 in the front, and as to mimic just 2 subs. Like if you had a JTR S2 or something, that would be 2 18s on flanking the screen either side, just to kind of make it more of a standard user setup. And we ran the test and evaluated from there.
Yeah, I'm interested in how Dirac looks to be filling in the nulls in that 100 to 200 region, or 300, whatever it was. I thought that was kind of interesting. Because to me, like, that's the area that we know that you can't really EQ a null. You can't bring that up, right? So that's what Art is supposed to be doing by having another speaker basically play it, cancel out the null, and it fills back in.
So
It
one of the
looks like it was
cool
working there.
things that Room EQ does do that is really difficult for people to do is phasing, right? Throughout the entire frequency range. Like we talk about phasing and getting your mains and your subs in phase, making sure your subs themselves are in phase, but Room EQ can do a lot more than what our ears can do, and it does it through all of these different algorithms and super cool things. And if you look at the phase graphs and stuff on like Trinov and Dirac and what it's actually doing, it's making heavy modifications to phasing and making sure that things are in phase at different frequency ranges. And so I think that's a big part of it, but that's something that's very difficult to do in a manual EQ.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a trade. It's a compromise, right? Everything in,
for sure.
in home theater, really in anything in life is a compromise. So I think that's a big part of it. Jonathan, that was an awesome example though.
Yeah.
I'm so very thankful that you're still going through all of that because it's very, very interesting to take a look at.
A fellow nerd.
Let's
Couple
see.
more questions.
Just making sure I'm not missing anything. So DMVP, thoughts on 2.1 screen as a compromise between 16:9 and 2.4 to 1. What are you guys' thoughts?
2.1 is a little odd, isn't it? Like if you wanted to do 2.0, you'd capture all the Netflix stuff. But 2.1, where does that put you? More black bars, right? Am I wrong? I think a Netflix is 2.0. Let me Google it real quick.
Isn't that the same thing? 2.0 to 1? I think it's just worded a different way.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know.
I'm web searching, trying. Yeah, okay. I mean, 2.0 is what everyone says Netflix.
I think it's 2.0 to 1.
2.0 is the same as 2:1.
Okay. All right. All right.
So I've thought about doing 2 to 1. Now I'm leaning towards just going with the biggest screen I possibly can. I would recommend getting a screen that is consistent with the type of content you typically watch. Would be my recommendation, so that you can limit the amount of perceivable black bars. If you got something like an Envy, it really doesn't matter, as long as you're okay with certain amounts of potential distortion, depending on how you set up the custom zoom configurations. That was a big reason why I'm just going with as big of a screen as I can, because I can fix things that I don't necessarily have to deal with black bars. Masking is also something to think about, but I think it's a very important thing to consider, because if you guys remember M-Wave in 2022, when Seymour did the masking demonstration, if you can see the black bars in your screen and then you take them away, there is a demonstrable difference in perceived contrast. Right? So if you can eliminate the black bars, if at all possible, it will make a huge difference in your immersive experience. So I would think about, one, potentially getting a screen that is used for your typical aspect ratio of content that you watch, or look at automatic or manual masking.
Hey, I'm gonna jump in here real fast. It's 9:30 my time. I'm gonna be honest. I'm gassed.
You're totally good, man.
You're good.
We got one more question. We're bailing too.
Oh, I'll hang on for one more question then.
We got one more question.
That's all we got.
I've been there before for that. You better be careful, Aaron. It'll be one more.
Yeah, this
one
last
more.
question right here.
30 minutes later. Oh no.
Yep.
Ideal ceiling height to have the separation in the vertical, 9 foot, 10 foot, 11 foot, 12 foot, or is there something in between? Is there an ideal?
I would say as high as you can go.
Yeah, for coverage of more rows, it's certainly easier with speaker dispersion to get it high as possible.
Or is acoustic treatment clouds? Could that help?
The clouds aren't going to help dispersion. I mean, diffusion will kind of, but not on the ceiling.
I'm just saying, like you're preventing, I guess, the reflections of that. But I guess you're not choosing the actual dispersion.
So think about how big a movie, like a commercial movie theater is, and how consistent the seat-to-seat SPL and response is a lot of times. Now, I've never measured it, but it's just from my experience. So the bigger the room, the better, and the more separation you're going to get from channels and objects.
We've talked about this before, but my ceiling height is not high enough. So you have these 6 ceiling speakers here, right? If you're sitting here, this is way off axis from these front ones, right? Even though I think they're like 70 degrees each way. It's supposed to be 150, maybe 75 each way. By the time it's not getting here. So these are not going to be very audible, or at least they're not going to sound very good from this back seat, and vice versa from the front to the back. So if I had taller ceiling heights, if I had 16-foot ceiling heights, that wouldn't be a problem. But it is a problem with a short ceiling. You just do what you can do with your room.
Yep. Do the best with what you can with what you got.
The other benefit to increased ceiling height is, like I talked about earlier, is your SPL and I talked about with commercial theater, your SPL is going to be more consistent seat to seat, and even in the same seat, speaker to speaker, because doubling of distance, the further out you get, the longer it takes for that SPL to fall off. So the further you can get that speaker away from you, remember, the further it gets away from you, the more output capable the speaker is going to have to be, but you're going to get a more consistent experience. It's just tough to increase your ceiling height unless you're chirpy and dig into your floor.
Jackhammer on the floor. Yeah.
Only
we made it right at 2 hours, 30 minutes, answered all the questions. So we're 30 minutes ahead of schedule, buddy. I like it. So here's a couple things I want you guys to do in the chat. If you're not already subscribed, head over to Erin's Audio Corner on YouTube. Subscribe. He's got some amazing content all about data driven. He's got some crazy sketchy stuff too. And I've seen some of your stuff lately, which is he's trying to get creative. He's doing some. I love your impressions, man. When you start doing characters, yeah.
I'm gonna do a whole video like that one of these days.
Yeah, he's doing some fun stuff. He's got a British dude on there. I like him.
Yeah.
He's pretty cool.
Yep.
And then, of course, we saw that at the beginning of the show. All of his data, all of the measurements, AaronsAudioCorner.com. But he also gives some extra stuff to his patrons, gives you early access on videos and measurements. So just nothing but love and appreciation for you, brother. What you bring to the space, the objectivity. And there's really nobody else doing that on YouTube fully, like with,
like we said earlier.
You know.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And I thoroughly enjoyed this, man. It was fun getting to nerd out a little bit and not being told, all right, that's enough. So
no, we'll just be quiet and let you run.
Yeah, that was fun. I appreciate it.
Cool, man.
Well, guys, hopefully people got something out of it.
Yep. Yeah. I hope you guys can join us for M-Wave 2024. You can get all the information on the website, and hope you have an incredible week, and we'll catch you next Sunday night. Y'all take care.